Chair, this meeting is being recorded and transcribed.
Right, and for the recording, I will introduce everyone around the table as well. There's no fire alarm test due today, so if it does go off, please, as usual, leave the building as quickly as you can by the nearest exit and gather in the car parks at the fire assembly points. Welcome to the Environment and Sustainability Scrutiny Committee of the 24th of March. I'm Louis Stark and I'm your chair. This meeting today is sadly not being live streamed because we're in a different committee room and we've had technical problems doing so. But it will be recorded and it will be updated to the website in due course. I think that's important to note. Can people keep background noise to a minimum and keep mobile phones off? And can they speak as loudly as possible so that people can hear what they're saying, both for the recording but also for people around the table? I think that's very important. Introductions. As I say, I've already introduced myself. On the committee today, we have Councillor Thomas, Councillor Highfield, Councillor Davis, Councillor Proctor, Councillor Heathfield, and Vice Chair, Councillor Peverdy. We also have Councillor Swinglehurst, Deputy Leader and the Lead on Environment. Officers Ben Boswell, Richard Vaughan, and Daniel Lennon. I'm pleased to invite you to this. And then support me today, we have Daniel Webb, the Scrutiny Officer, Simon Carn, the Clerk, and Alfie Rees-Glynos, who is actually operating the recording as we speak. To the agenda, Clerk. Item 1, apologies for absence.
Sorry, we had apologies from Councillor Robert Owens.
Okay. And we have a substitute today, Councillor Proctor. Thanks for volunteering to come today, Councillor Proctor. I hope you enjoy the meeting.
Sure I will.
And I hope it's worth your time having come. Yeah. Have we got any declarations of interest? No. Minutes. Are members happy for me to sign the minutes as a fair reflection of our last meeting of the Scrutiny Committee? All those in favour? Right, Simon, that's agreed. Item 5, have we any questions from members of the public?
No questions. No.
Item 6, questions from members of the council? No, okay. We go on to item 7, which is our first substantive topic today, energy efficiency and retrofitting. As I said previously, I'm going to allow this debate to run up until 11:30, when I will bring it to a close. I will then have a short comfort break, during which we will agree any recommendations we have, and then we'll reconvene to look at our second substantive topic, which is a 6-month review of the waste contract. I will deal with the timing of that debate when we come to that particular topic. I'd like to thank the officers for the report and the appendix they have provided today, particularly the appendix, because committee members, you will note that we had 3 objectives for this particular topic, and the appendix quite usefully covers all 3 objectives in quite some detail. Just one word of caution, please. The third objective on the private renters reform bill, that goes much wider than our remit today. I'm delighted it has. I do think that private renters reform bill is a topic that one scrutiny committee will have to consider at some stage. It's certainly of a very great interest to me how the council is going to cope when it becomes law in terms of enforcing the act. But can we please today just constrain ourselves to the living conditions part of it? That's around the mould and damp, around adequate heating, around adequate insulation, around the energy efficiency ratings that they've set, which I don't think are very ambitious at all. More than happy for you to raise that and we see whether we can have a debate on that as well. But I don't want to go any wider than that because obviously our focus today is on energy efficiency and retrofitting. To start the debate running, I will just remind us of our 3 objectives. The first one is to understand the outcomes of the building retrofit and supply chain development funded by the Climate Reserve Fund. The second one is to evaluate progress on Keep Herefordshire Warm and hug initiatives. And the third one, as I've already mentioned in passing, consider an update on the impact of the new rented property sector energy efficiency regulations. Well, actually, it's more than that. It's actually a private rented reform bill, but that's the area we want to look at as well. If I may start by just trying to set the context for this. Councillor Swingerhurst, I know that one of the main drivers of our push on energy efficiency and retrofitting is our net zero ambition across the county. It's not the only one. I mean, obviously, as I mentioned, there's a big well-being issue here. There's obviously a big issue around the cost of living crisis, because if you can make homes energy efficient, it will actually keep their bills down. But I have to say, and I'm sure others have noticed, that nationally and internationally, the mood music on net zero has become more pessimistic. There's no doubt about it in certain quarters. I just want, for the record, Councillor Swingerhurst, since we are recording this, can you confirm that the executive is still aiming for net zero by 2030 across the county? And two, can you give us any sort of assessment of how achievable that is 5 years out, as we are now?
Yeah, the executive hasn't changed that
Right.
target. So, as I know, that's still where we're trying to get to. However, realistically, whilst I have a high level of confidence that as a council we can get to our target, we do not have a direct line of influence between us and all the emitters within the county. And that's always the challenge. I think when the target was set, that was an acknowledged challenge and difficulty, because if you don't have the levers, you can only do so much. But that wasn't a reason not to at least have a stretch target, do everything you can, which is, I think what we are doing. Realistically, do I think that the county will get to net zero by 2030? I don't think it will. But but for me, I'm more interested in how far can we go, rather than just give it all up before we even, get to 2030. We should try our utmost. We should do everything we can.
Yeah, I know Councillor Hadfield's got an interest in this.
Yes, I support what you're saying, but I wanted to chime in with my little thing about net zero. The definition of net zero that the government and international are using is the point at which we reach no increase in the amount of warming gases in the atmosphere, i.e. there's a balance between what leaves the atmosphere and what arrives in the atmosphere. And that means that for our county, if we were to succeed miraculously in achieving net zero by 2030, that will be the point at which this county is adding the maximum number of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere that it could possibly increase, that it could possibly add. That will be the maximum warming point. It will not be the point where we're no longer warming. There's a big misunderstanding about this. The definition does not mean the point at which we no longer warm the environment. It's the point at which we're no longer adding or increasing the amount of warming gases. And therefore, the only scientific answer that will meet the needs of the world is sequestration. Because stopping producing CO2, for example, does not get rid of it. It takes hundreds of years to disappear naturally from the atmosphere. So if we reach that carbon, that neutral point, the amount of carbon dioxide, particularly in the atmosphere, will not start to decrease quickly. It will be very slow. And so there'll be dramatic warming going on after reaching net zero. And net zero is the point where the maximum warming will take place if we achieve it. And so therefore, what we should also be adding to the mix is sequestration, i.e. we've got to find ways of removing warming gases from the atmosphere. We do a bit already. I mean, tree planting and some of our wetlands projects, peat, that sort of thing is a sequestration system, but it's a drop in the ocean compared with what needs to be done. And I want to make sure, I don't have a policy on this, I don't have anything to add to support it, except that I want this council at least to understand that fact that we're dealing with, that background fact. And that's it from me.
Councillor Hadfield.
Yeah.
Does anyone else want to come in at this stage, or shall I go on? I will go on. The reason why I raised that particular point, Councillor Swinhouse, is that that sets the context for our discussion today on energy efficiency and retrofitting. And while I was pleased to see the actions that are going on in the actual area, I didn't see any particular indication of what we expected from this particular piece of work in terms of that net zero ambition. I don't know whether we have talked about that within the executive or whether that's something that we as a committee need to think about in terms of
Yeah,
a
how do you-
recommendation.
The carbon benefit
Yes,
of this. Yeah, I mean, I think at the moment, particularly when you look at the retrofit, the scale of the challenge versus the ability that we have to meet that challenge are horrendously mismatched. So we know that we've got 14,000 households in fuel poverty. We can retrofit even at full bore, you know, a rate of about 100 a year if funded, and the funding has just reduced by quite a lot. And we're one of the sort of leading authorities in rolling out retrofit, but it's not touching the edges. It's not, you know, the scale of the challenge is far greater than our ability to meet it. But you know, given that, we're doing really well with it. But in terms of the emissions of the county, it's not going to really move the dial, I don't think.
Yeah.
But you did mention, and I think it's important, particularly when you're talking about retrofit, the other benefits, the co-benefits, and
I know there are.
that's tremendously important. And that sort of sets that it does give it a kind of a special.
I've
place as well,
mentioned other
if you did,
benefits,
yeah.
I don't want to lose that. But it's important to try and get an
Yeah.
idea of
But we should
why we're
capture
doing
where
this.
we can, capture reduction where we can, because otherwise how will we know how well we're doing? So we do know that as a county, the emissions are reducing by, what are we at, 40 something,
It's roughly, it's 30, 40, I can't remember.
40%.
Yeah, I can get you the exact
You
figure in
know,
a minute.
it's roughly doing half as well as we are as a council. So it's going in the right direction. It's just going there a lot slower. But the frustration for us is that we don't have the levers. We don't have the direct ability to control things. So we might see, well, you know, if everyone suddenly went out and got an EV tomorrow, then, you know, you'd see a reduction in transportation, but we can't make everybody do that. And we can't buy a car for everyone. So there's a limit to, you know, what we can do. We can put in some of the infrastructure and we can kind of encourage and promote.
I'll come back to this. I know Councillor Thomas wants to come in. I know Councillor Davis has got an interest in the makeup of that 14,000, and I'll bring him in then. But you'll see the logic of my question when I start to talk about our sort of interventions here. I think that's quite important, and I have got some sort of challenges there, Councillor Swinger, as to how much we are intervening in this area. Because as we rightly say, it's not just about net zero, it's about the well-being and the comfort and the health almost of some of our poorest residents in the county. Councillor Thomas, are you happy coming, Councillor Davis, to make up? And then I'll bring in Councillor Proctor, then Councillor Heathfield. Councillor Thomas.
I agree with both the last speakers. With carbon, we know that whatever we do today, it won't start to reduce for 5 to 10 years. So that on that score, Councillor Heigl is right. On the sort of retrofitting, because obviously I am retrofitting a house at the moment. It's not very achievable because most properties in Herefordshire that have not been retrofitted, there's an awful lot of listed properties in Hereford. You can't touch those. There's nothing really you can do for those. We might be able to do the internal. There's two major problems. First of all, in here it's said that we need 500,000 people to retrofit. We haven't even got 500,000 people in the construction industry. There's only about 375,000 at the moment. The big push is on to get these 1.5 million houses, which I think we all know is sort of pie in the sky, it'll never be achieved. But you can't take people off that to retrofit. And you see, the cost of retrofitting, there's two, if it's an old property, you've got to go internally. You can't really go, these lovely bricks that we've got in this county, you can't go and cover those up. You've got to go internally. I'm doing one at the moment. It's only a 2-bed house, small cottage in the countryside. It's probably, by the time we finish, it's going to cost 40,000 to retrofit, because it's not just putting insulation on the inside of the walls. You do that, you've got to rewire the house, you've got to replaster all the house, you've got to redecorate all the house. And a lot of contractors are not particularly interested, because a lot of those jobs are not covered within what they get paid for. So they're just not, nobody's interested in doing it because it's unprofitable. So we've got to somehow try and sort this out. Some more modern houses or blocks of flats, you can go externally, but then you've got to fit all, again, you've got to render them all on the outside, and you've got to put new windows in, because obviously you need the efficiency of new windows anyway. Again, it's quite expensive. They did a lot of flats in Hereford, and I think this is what, 5-7 years ago now, they were £35,000 a flat, and there is what, 12 in each block. It's mega expensive.
Well, we know that affordability and achievability have issues for us.
Yeah.
Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. One of the things I wanted to raise was the initiatives that we've had in place for improving homes from Hug 2 and the warmer homes policy we currently have are restricted in what they can do. And I was wondering if there's any plan to change that, because when I say restricted, there are cases of size of properties, even though each property is means tested to see if we can support them. Even those people who have been means tested, if their property is too big for the particular banding of the benefits, then they can't get done. And I've had cases in my ward where that's been the case. And it would possibly be better if we could means test properties and then say there is a cap to the amount of money we were prepared to spend on those properties, as opposed to means testing and saying no because your property is too big.
Yeah.
So I don't know what your thoughts are on that. Would that be something that's feasible?
Jump in.
Yeah.
So I think one of the big issues in here, a number, is the government does provide support and funding to some of these programmes, but as Councillor Swinger has said, like the scale of some of these compared to the scale of challenge we've got, we previously had 7.7 million on the last scheme, and we delivered really well. We didn't manage to do all of it, but we understand we're second in the region for delivery
across the Midlands.
And given how difficult some of this is with some of the challenges we've got, being pleased with that. But those schemes are fairly short timescales. So everyone's different. So we don't set the criteria on these schemes. We do try and lobby and work closely with, those departments and sort of BESNEV and the Net Zero Hub to try and help shape those, if that makes sense, because Herefordshire has its own housing stock with its own unique challenges that's different to others across the country, if that makes sense. And they're coming up with national schemes. And so we're trying to make sure we can best deliver for Herefordshire, but they are national schemes with national terms and conditions. And very frustratingly, they're typically sort of 1, 2, 3 year programmes where we have to, and even when they're small, they're still large. You have to go and procure them and spend months procuring these schemes to get them up and running, to then have them come to an end, to then go and restart a different one with slightly different criteria shortly afterwards, which creates a bit of stop-start in some of the delivery of these, which again is another challenge. So where we can, we are having those conversations to say these are the challenges we need to be able to come around. So we could definitely take that back, and we could definitely ask. We'll ask the question, so we'll take that as an action, I guess. But just to say, that is not always set by us, if that makes sense.
And maybe I can just add to that, if that's okay as well, Ben. So yeah, really good point. We will feed back to the hub on the national grant funding, but as Ben says, we don't set the terms and conditions, but we do also offer support outside of that to try and complement that grant funding. So Obviously, the amount of money in the climate reserve is much more limited compared to the national funding, but is there, and we do try and target and complement that grant funding through our able to pay retrofit schemes. So previously we've been running home energy savers. Now we're looking at a replacement for that, which will deliver those free retrofit assessments and also money towards retrofit. And where we're doing that, we've got a lot more control over those T's and C's. So we can absolutely take that on board. And when we look to launch something in the summer, we can absolutely do that, because it's a very common sense approach, isn't it? If you say, okay, well, we'll put this much towards it, it doesn't really matter how big your house is. If that's how much we can afford to put towards it, we'll support. So yeah, absolutely, it's probably worth a recommendation, but we can take that away and both feedback to government, but also take that on board for our own, while we've got more control.
Councillor Davis, before I go on to Councillor Proctor, are you happy for that to be recorded in the minutes as a commitment from the officers to do that?
Yes.
Or would you want it to be a recommendation in itself?
Well, I think if it's going to be taken on by the officers, then it doesn't need to be a
No, it
recommendation.
doesn't need a recommendation, but we will make sure it's recorded in the
Yeah.
minutes, Clark.
Yeah,
I think that's very important, because I don't want to lose sight of it. Councillor Proctor?
So I think my point is around the same area. So obviously, I don't normally sit on this committee, so I'm coming to this quite sort of naively. And what I didn't get a sense of was, in 5 years' time, ideally, this is where we would like to be. That would mean all of these things would have to stack up. Here are the things that we can definitely do. Here are the things that we definitely can't do, and here are the things where maybe we could. And I don't. So I kind of hear and accept that the things that we can definitely do are probably quite limited, but I don't have a clear picture on the kind of gap between what we would need to be doing, or what would need to happen in the county, and what we think is actually going to happen in the county.
Yeah.
Yes.
Need to respond to that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so we've recently got some software called Parity Projects, which has been very helpful in demonstrating the scale of the task. Now, unfortunately, it was too late to go into the report that we wrote for this committee, but we can share thereafter. We know there are about 84,000 homes in the county. What this software does is say, okay, but we'll set out parameters for what a net zero scenario might look like. In terms of the balance of things, we're looking at roughly an EPC scenario for most properties. The investment required that it's been estimated is £3.4 billion to achieve that. So as Ben says, when we're talking about grant funding over a 3-year period of 2.4 million, that's more than 1,000th of the amount required. So that gives, I know it's pretty crude in terms of saying the scale, but that gives you an indication of that scale. That's what we're looking at. If we want to get to a net zero scenario, that's roughly the scale of the challenge. And then you can see kind of what we're doing at the moment, 7 million over the last few years, 2.4 million over the next 3 years. It's an indication.
Yeah, and so just to jump in, we have done strategy pieces numerous times. I think the last one we did was very much looking at that scale of the problem or the challenge, and how do you break that down into the different elements to then intervene. And I guess that kind of looks to the approach we've got in terms of how we're supporting residents. So these funds are typically, sort of grant systems with eligibility criteria. And then what the government would say is that beyond the threshold, you're into an able to pay market, where it's then about residents who, I can't remember what the exact terminology is, but it's essentially having the capacity and willingness to be able to do that themselves. The difficulty therein lies that people have other challenges as well, that they need to make those decisions. They might have an amount of money that could go into retrofit, but it may need to go into care, or it may need to go into education, or it may, whatever else is going on in their family environment. And I guess it's how we can support those there to be able to make those decisions and to make good informed decisions and have access to those kinds of services. So I think what we've tried to do is have a kind of one-stop shop come into Keep Herefordshire Warm, so we can give free, impartial advice to anyone who, it doesn't matter who you are in Herefordshire. If you want to get some advice, and we can signpost to any opportunities that are out there. That's the approach we've sort of taken, to make sure that you can come to one place, get that support, and then we can facilitate them with whatever is available at the time. to be able to support them, if that makes sense. So we have done a number of different projects that sort of look at different areas in terms of, you know, how do we hit off gas grid? How do we look at able to pay? How do we look at maximising grant schemes? And we're looking at all of this, if that makes sense. But inherently, the money that's available changes, and we're trying to be as agile and as tactical as we can in terms of when there's an opportunity, how do we pounce on that opportunity and get the best for Herefordshire, if that makes sense. And then it's about getting straight into like delivering, supporting them as quickly as we can. So I think we touched on this morning, the new allocation we're going to get for the next 3 years is, I think, 2.4 million. We asked for 6.6. That's a challenge. You know, we were one of the best delivery on the last one, which was 7.7. We're now 2.4. That's a real challenge for us. And so what we're looking to do is, how do we make sure we're ready to go so we can support residents as quickly as we can? If we know that other local authorities are going to struggle to spend their allocations, so we want to be in a position where we can spend hours, be knocking on the door and saying, right, we've got these residents who are already waiting for the next round. Is there any opportunity we could draw in that as quickly as we can, if that makes sense? But maybe not being as strategic as I think you alluded to, Councillor Proctor, but it's around, we've done a lot of that strategy work in terms of how best to do those interventions. It's really trying to pull in that resource and finance to be able to help people to make that, if that makes sense. It's being as agile as we can on that.
This brings me back to the point I sort of raised earlier. When you look at the paper and the work that's been done, it's excellent, but it's reacting to funding streams that are coming our way. And I can understand where Councillor Proctor's coming from here. I don't get a sense of what we want to achieve here. I don't get a sense of where the executive has thought about putting some capital money in themselves into this area, and what they can do.
But I think
Because
in the past, the 151 officer wasn't having it, but we are going to have another look at it. Because I think that to go back to Councillor Proctor's point about how do you deal with it strategically to scale, because if we're limiting to only what the government will fund, clearly that's going to get that seems to be going in a less and less and less, which where in fact we need to be doing more and more and more. But really the key is nationally and locally to mobilise private markets. How do we mobilise private markets? That's the difficulty, particularly when, as Councillor Thomas points out, there are issues within the industry trying to do that and also build on 1.5 million houses. You know, that skill set, those people are going to be also busy doing something else at the same time that we're asking them to do this. So how do you turn that around? Now, we have looked. I mean, certainly, you know, we've discussed on any number of occasions how do we mobilise private markets and enable private householders to meet their own need. Because the other thing is to go back to where you were starting around the co-benefits. If you were just looking at this from a climate change point of view, then the houses you would want to retrofit are the ones that are the most thermally inefficient. The ones where the heat is, you know, if you did a thermal image, it would be a blue-shaped house with a red outline, like a ready bread kid, you know. But those are not the ones that we go for, because we also are bolting in, because the funding, affordability, and whether somebody's on a benefit and so on and so forth. So in fact, that house might not be emitting nearly as much as a big old bleaky farmhouse or whatever, these difficult houses. So we need to find some way of making that, you know, if we were looking at through the climate change lens, we take the troublesome houses. And that's what I always say to the team. Yeah. If we could find a way of funding the house, or the house must pay, which logically would be via some form of charge against the property, that you would then say at some point when the value within that house is realised, that money has to come back plus interest. But and that's the kind of concept we've been trying to model through, and we're going to have another run and see if we can make that make sense in some way. But it's not, generally speaking, what the council does, so it's a difficult conversation to have. But it is, you know, how do we mobilise private markets? Don't know. The other obvious tool that we have in our box always is planning.
I know Councillor Heathfield and Councillor Fetridge has been very patient here, but this is where I come back to this idea that we ought to have a plan set out here on how we want to use this particular area of activity, energy efficiency, retrofitting, to achieve those core benefits, because we don't have. And it's not, as you say, it's not just climate change, it's cost of living crisis it tackles. It's public health issues it tackles. It's children's health it tackles. And there's so many horror stories out there that we will touch upon when we come to the private sector
It
sector
just
later
comes down
on.
to money.
So there's a huge sort of policy game to be had here. So I think one of the recommendations will be around this idea of having an actual coherent policy,
Yeah.
which then drives out these core benefits that we talked about. And we may need to look at recommendation in that light as well. Councillor Heathfield, sorry you've waited so long.
That's a Swinglehurst. Just on that, you mentioned the 151 officer wouldn't have it. I just wanted to check that what they wouldn't have was that idea of clawing back money.
I think it was just that it's not, we don't generally do things and then put it as against a charge and then be potentially chasing that around forever, and we don't have the,
No certainty about it.
yeah, we're just not set up to do that, so I think that's, but that's not to say that we wouldn't maybe have the conversation again and just see if there is some mechanism that we could use, through maybe some existing mechanism that we have that we could adapt. But I think that's the problem at the moment, is that we're just not set up to do that by being a private bank.
Sorry to jump in, it's just that as described, it sounds exactly like what we do in social care.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying, is can we use an existing mechanism in an imaginative way? That's a very good parallel, yeah.
So what my question actually was, obviously you're dealing with just huge amounts of national government uncertainty. Like, when will there be a national retrofit delivery agency? Would be an easy thing to have. And it's really disappointing to hear that, since the retrofit academy was through February last year, just nothing seems to have happened on that. Skills stuff, training consortia, seeing what funding routes there might be. And it feels like, that work is happening in the Northwest. I just wonder, what could be happening there? It does feel very disappointing that that's been dropped since last February.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't mean to pick that up.
And I know it's really difficult, and there might be a national thing, but who knows when and who knows what it will be. But I feel like that, the industry cannot deliver at the moment, and surely we have a role there.
Yeah, so if you're okay to respond to that one. So we've been working with the Low Carbon Technology Training Centre at Hope Lacey.
Yeah.
And they've had grant funding from the council by SBF to provide training for retrofit for installers for low carbon, for renewables, etc. So the council has supported them that way. And we've also been working, broadly speaking, when we talk about County Net Zero, we work with a number of partners across the county in something we call the Herefordshire CMP, Herefordshire Climate Nature. Thank you. So a range of partners there, including representatives from Herefordshire Green Network. So we work with the network as well, promoting various bits and pieces, and the network have been providing retrofit training for installers as well. And we also provided some top-up funding for some retrofit training as well, didn't we? Yeah. So an extra 69 installers received training there. Was that with HGN, or was that via another? Yeah, there's a few mechanisms we use on there. That was with okay, that was with So at the very end of Appendix 1, there's quite a few paragraphs there where they're relatively short, but there are bits and pieces that we've been doing. So whilst there isn't this one single solution, it's not quite accurate to say nothing's been done. We've just been working with different partners in different ways. What we can see is the landscape is very challenging, and the money comes in different locations and different places, and different people can access that. So there's some funding from the energy companies that can only be delivered by charities. So we work with the likes of MEA and 7Y Energy Agency to help deliver that. We also provide the top-up funding that we thought about, the 69 additional installers, and then the UK SBF through the Low Carbon Technology Centre. So there's 3 or 4 different avenues we have been doing since then. So take the point, we can certainly do more, but it's not the case we haven't done any. But perhaps, and what we always find is we do our very best when it comes to comms, but we always need to shout louder about it and make sure everybody knows. So yeah, lots going on, and we try and keep tabs on all of it and try and, as Ben says, it's kind of that one-stop shop, because it's it's challenging for us to keep tabs on it. It's even worse for homeowners. And that's why we use Keep Herefordshire Warm as that single point of contact for residents. They don't have to worry about all of this stuff. They can pick up the phone. There's one telephone number. Keep Herefordshire Warm keeps tabs on it and says, okay, have you thought about this? And then if an installer comes to them, they can also say, okay, you aware of this opportunity in Herefordshire? So it's there and we've been working on it, but we can definitely do more.
Councillor Heathfield, if there's a recommendation coming out of that discussion, then happy to have it. If not, fine. But I'm more than happy to have a recommendation if you think that would help. I'm going to go on to, I'll come back to you, Councillor Proctor. I want to go to Councillor Pemberton because you've been waiting very, very patiently.
We've just heard a lot about lots of barriers to actually sort of moving forward with this, to do with finance, to do the clunkiness of sort of government grants and stuff like that. And just focusing on the able to pay group who may be able to pay but have other reasons not to. It seems that other local authorities are kind of partnering with social enterprise finance to offer really low interest loans, which then gives these able to pay people an incentive to do the work through this scheme. It also deals with the barrier of mistrust. So when you've obviously contracted someone to deliver grant funded retrofit schemes, I would say that homeowners who are able to pay may already have trusted relationships with their own suppliers and contractors. And so if you can take away that barrier of mistrust with a contractor that the council has commissioned, so they can use their own contractors. So I just wonder if partnering with a group like Lendology CIC, who work with South Gloucestershire and lots of other local authorities throughout the country, you can provide low interest finance to the able to pay and actually let them get on with it themselves, and it will take away a lot of those barriers. And I do wonder whether the pass standard is actually could possibly be quite a big barrier to people actually getting on with the work. And that if they had the freedom to make their own choices about the standards that they achieve. I mean, everyone's trying to achieve a better EPG energy rating, which is kind of a test to the work that's been done. There's kind of an evaluation there in itself. Without the pass standard, if they achieve a better energy rating.
Completely agree with you. Totally agree with you.
Yeah. I've got one very quick point that is irrelevant.
Yeah, but
Not irrelevant, but separate.
No, just before you go on to that, can we be more flexible here? We could be if we were doing the funding ourselves, couldn't we? In some respects.
Yeah. Okay. There's a very good reason why we use past 2035, and it's not to ensure that they get to a certain EPC. As you say, any improvement you make is great. The reason why we use past 2035, even when we don't have to, so for example, we are able to pay where we set the T's and C's, is to prevent cowboys. To be past 2035 registered, it is a bit of a blocker, and there are pros and cons. So the downside is little local installers probably aren't going to bother because it's a lot of hard work for them. And that's a real problem. We recognise that, and we want to support the local retrofit supply chain. But what it does do is ensure quality. And we're not aware of another mechanism available to us where we can say, okay, you need certain certification or qualification, so that the money that we give to the homeowner very much does go to retrofit through a decent builder, a decent supplier, a decent local retrofitter. If there was another way of doing it, we'd be very happy to hear that. But it's just making sure that a cowboy doesn't intervene and, you know, takes advantage of Mrs. Miggins, takes council money, and then we spend an alternate amount of time trying to claw that money back and try and do the right thing for the homeowner. So that's why we
I get that if that's council funded.
Yeah,
money.
but if it's not,
I get how important it is. If it's people's own personal finance.
Oh,
then-
sure.
we can assume competence in people to
Yeah.
Absolutely.
make sensible decisions if they're informed about what they need to look for.
Yeah.
I think we might support in that way.
Yeah.
But I think that's a very good idea, and if we don't already do it, I'm very happy to have that as a recommendation.
And there's some really good models for doing that.
Yeah.
So I mean, I've looked at Lendology CIC, but I mean they're working with about sort of 40 other local authorities and finding some real success.
So if you could give us a draft a recommendation. I know you've got another point, but if you've got a.
Yeah, my only other point was just to follow up, and this is not especially relevant to where the conversation's gone, but as the owner of a listed building, I can tell you there's a lot you can do in terms of retrofitting, and I get fantastic support from listed building officers at the council about what I can do and what improvements I can make. So I don't think it's right, perhaps Councillor Thomas, to say that there's not much we can do. I think there's a lot.
There's less.
There's less. That's what we are.
There's still some.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
if there is a recommendation there, Councillor Pemberton, please get it across us. Just before you come in, Councillor Highfield, I mean, I'm interested in this PAS 2035 standard applying to commercial buildings and to our own properties and to schools. Have we ever thought about being able to apply it to in that area? But surely that would be a very good approach in terms of actually bringing a discipline to when you're looking at trying to make those buildings more energy efficient as well.
Daniel might jump in and correct me, but my understanding is PAS 2035 is around domestic energy retrofit as a standard for accreditors. And that's been driven largely, as Rich said, around ensuring quality and reliability and supply chain so that it's done properly, if that makes sense. And that's why a lot of the funding we get comes with that condition to be able to do that. In terms of commercial buildings, I mean, we've looked at numerous different, so you know, where we've commissioned projects in the past, like you look at Hark, that was to passive house as a way of doing that. So we've done, you know, a couple of passive house, then you can look at things like BREEAM as a standard of doing that in commercial in a different way. I think it's more around the accreditation of the supplier rather than the accreditation of the building, if that makes sense, because I think there's two things. One is, what's the performance of a building? I guess in domestic, using your EPC to assess its performance. And then it's PAS 2035, which is the mechanism by the installer becomes accredited to deliver that.
So before you come back, so how do we do this for commercial buildings and for schools and for own properties then?
So a really good example would be the museum retrofit that's due to happen. And the council actually has gone much further beyond that and is looking at a really high energy retrofit called Enefit. And so retrofitting the museum opposite the cathedral to that level, Enefit is the equivalent of passive house, but it's a retrofit equivalent. So that is an incredibly high level of thermal efficiency, where that building will actually only run off one or two tiny domestic boilers. And we'll have renewable energy bolts on. So you can go much further beyond by using these various standards. The commercial, I've just had a look, the commercial variant of PAS 2035 is PAS 2038. So there is a commercial version of PAS 2035, as Ben says, because PAS 2035 is primarily.
Do we apply that to our own properties?
What I'm saying is, so when you take the museum as an example, we're going much further than that.
And that's
So-
only one.
It
I
is
mean, what's it called? PAS 2038, is it?
2038.
Well, that'll change that recommendation then, from 35 to 38. But I do think this systematic approach could be beneficial to us as a council, because we've got loads of properties that we own and we rent out, and we've got schools that we advise on, and other associated sectors like care homes. So I think that's a recommendation. But Councillor Beverly, don't lose sight of that recommendation that you had. I thought that was very good in terms of the way you might be able to open up the market, by the way you might actually initiate different ways of funding and everything else. Yes, I think that'd be useful to say.
Recommendations in teams.
Yeah,
Correct.
Teams.
We got,
I'll come back to you.
is it outside of teams? Okay, sorry, I'll get
If
on.
you don't
Teams.
mind, thank you. But I don't want to lose sight of that, because that shows we're adding value.
Yeah.
I have got a performance target to meet in my own mind. That's the Proctor.
Sorry, Councillor Stark, can I
Oh,
just add
sorry.
something before we carry on? It's worth noting as well, so not only do we set those standards such as Enefit when we're looking at new, but also we have done retrofit assessments across the entirety of the council estate now. So we low carbon heat assessments to understand what the art of the possible is and what we should do and where we can invest. So we're getting that strategic view of the estate, understanding where those opportunities are, what needs doing, because obviously it changes per building. The diversity of the estate is incredible as to the sorts of buildings, not just the kind of civic buildings and the schools, but the offices and all sorts and different ages and types and what have you. So those very specific studies really help us on a site-by-site basis say, okay, what is required here? and what does the payback look like? What's the level of investment required? How much carbon will we save? And then we can take those assessments and we can look at our energy consumption per site. And this is all the sort of thing that Danny does when we say, okay, well, gas consumption is particularly high here. What are the opportunities? Electricity consumption is pretty high here. What are the opportunities? And we use that to kind of prioritise those projects. So, for example, the solar carports here, and electricity consumption is very high at Plough, and so solar is a good option for that. So we're doing that work, we're taking that strategic view of the estate, and then we're creating that plan for retrofit.
The recommendation from us will give you a chance then to respond in that way, but I still think a standard systematic approach, not just to our buildings, but to all public authority buildings across the county, would be quite a useful approach. So I think we'll leave the recommendation, but then you've more or less given us your responses to, at least in part, as to how you're going to answer it. Councillor Proctor.
So I want to totally support Councillor Pepperdy's recommendation, but possibly push it even a little further. So it seems to me in this discussion that a focus on the able to pay market could potentially, like, there's a series of ifs, like if we could work out what were the right, you could unlock a load of money that people already have and potentially benefit those people in the medium term financially as well as the climate, and stimulate the local retrofit market. Because I imagine if you're asking me to invest time in training my staff in retrofit, what I really want is to see that there is a market. And then if we have a thriving retrofit market, when the government occasionally hands us a few million quid, it will be even easier to go out and I mean, I accept that there are some big ifs in there, and I'm still not totally sure whether we understand what it is, what all the things that sort of hold. I keep thinking about my in-laws who they live in a property that would benefit from retrofit. They're in their 80s. They're like, what? It's not finance that's holding them back. It's probably just like it would be massively inconvenient, and but I do feel like a focus on like a specific market stimulation strategy around the kind of able to pay market feels something worthwhile for us.
By all means, Councillor Proctor, if you want to amend the recommendation through Councillor Heathfield and Pevity to something stronger, then we can consider that. More than happy to, yes.
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Highfield, yeah.
Just to expand on that double recommendation, an idea that occurred to me is that if we have got an information sheet that it outlines all of the possible sources to help with this, whether they be private or public, and if we could ask the energy companies to send that out to the people who have large bills for their utilities, that might be a way of getting information both to the people who can perhaps claim under the free schemes and people who would be able to self-finance and would be encouraged by being told that there are sort of schemes with low interest and so on and so forth. So maybe that's a way of getting that information out. So that was a suggestion to consider whether we could approach the energy companies about that. The second point I wanted to make was Councillor Swinglehurst talked about how nice it would be if we could target the glowing houses rather than the energy, the people who are struggling with their bills. What about the parts of the houses? I mean, the low-hanging fruit. I've read somewhere that the average house, you could save 5% of their energy costs just with draft excluders that cost a few pounds. So the bang for the buck is tremendous. Have we got any way of funding that? Even more importantly, I've heard that in the average family, over 50% of their energy use could be saved by treating their lounge only to the highest standards. In other words, triple glaze the windows and insulate the walls of the lounge only. And that alone would do a lot. And in my house, I found that my house was built but not certified to passive house standards. One of the reasons it's failing at the moment is the roof insulation. There's they use a reflective system, not an insulating pad. They use reflection. And those reflective things are going to cost me £270 to have them renewed, which is peanuts, to be perfectly frank. So there are ways of perhaps plucking the low-hanging fruit instead of doing a whole job on a house. And is there a method by which partial payment for really effective work can be claimed by people or supported to encourage them in their to make sure they know this for if they're going to fund it themselves? Is there a way to make sure that the low-hanging fruit is plucked since there's such a shortage of money?
I agree with you, and I think that idea with Councillor Beverley's idea is exactly the right thing, because one of the limitations we talk about the trouble with PAS is that it does make good the enemy of the perfect. You can't get something that's an improvement over the line because it's not fabulous.
Yeah.
But there's probably any amount of low hanging fruit, as you describe it, out there, which could be done for relatively low amounts of money. So even if we go back to the troublesome listed building, you can't replace the windows, but you could secondary glaze. But secondary glazing is not the most expensive thing in the world, but it makes an enormous difference to the thermal properties of a building. But you can't do that in isolation if you're doing a retrofit. You'd have to do everything. Well, you're not going to do everything because then it becomes problematical. You don't fit the criteria. So it's this kind of large number of able to pay where decisions exactly like that, based on a kind of pragmatic approach, could bring a lot of benefit. Relatively low amount of money, which we can't, we're struggling to capture. So I think that this kind of joined up makes a very good approach, which I would like
Councillor Proctor's
look into with Councillor Proctor's idea of actually looking at this
elderly relatives
around the able to pay. How do we support them? Because actually that's a conversation then with planning, perhaps with heritage. How do we help people to do this?
and his elderly relatives might be willing to do something less intrusive rather than doing the whole house, because
maybe put secondary glazing in or something that's not a big deal.
Yeah. So
do you want to make that a recommendation, councillor?
yes. Do we want to build that into theirs, or is it getting too
I'll build it into
complicated?
theirs if you want to add a phrase or two into theirs.
Adding value.
And
Adding value.
I just wanted to say that really good idea, actually. It was interesting just speaking to Danny there. That sort of really low level intervention that, like you say, is a no brainer. It costs 50 quid or less. It doesn't feature in the retrofit reports that we commission. It's actually too low level. So that if somebody had a report, that wouldn't come out through the report. So actually that sort of thing, we'll look into it and figure it out. But we could speak to Keep Herefordshire Warm and say, look, if we put forward 20, 50 quid per property, what would that look like? And could we help people just do this? It might be a really nice, simple.
I mean, it cost me £7 for my scullery, which is not heated in any way, and it's a bit of a chilly place to go into to work the washing machine and whatever. And by putting draft excluder strips only on the back door, which is the original door, is probably 200 years old, it's made a dramatic difference, and it cost £7, I think, to buy them in a place. So
I'm going to come on to Councillor Pebberdy, but Councillor Heathfield, are you doing the omnibus recommendation of this, or what are you doing?
I'm trying to write something about skills at the moment.
I'm going to go into skills in a minute. This is the last question in this area, because I want to go on to skills.
Something that both Helen and I have discussed, but you've just referred to Keep Herefordshire Warm initiative as kind of but actually the report about what Keep Herefordshire Warm incentive has achieved over 12 months is incredibly underwhelming. They've managed 16 home visits in a year. They've spoken to, 400 people. It's not a lot. And I think we need to look at what they're delivering, why it's so very, very little. I mean, it struck both of us as being unbelievably a small amount of kind of support and intervention that they've been able to offer to households. Considering it's 14,000 fuel poor households, 16 home visits felt, why is that so small? So I think if we are going to come up with new initiatives, then we've really got to look at who's going to deliver that and spread the message, because it feels to me that I think, is it Yes Energy who are delivering? Yeah. I don't think they're doing what we need them to be doing at the moment.
Yes,
doing what they've got the money for, but what is it?
Yeah, so
right.
yeah,
Finally, yeah.
So one of the reasons that the number of households contacting Keep Everyone was low is because we got the HUG scheme running concurrently, but with a different energy advice contractor.
Yeah.
So you've already got 300 people over here and 466 here. Now, with regards to home visits, it's something that I want to increase, and what they do is they have follow-up intensive interviews with the homeowner, and they do send them some energy efficiency products to put into their home where they can't access, or they've got vulnerabilities, or they can't do it themselves. They may be offered a home visit, but it's definitely something that we're looking into to try and increase the number of home visits.
Are you happy we capture that in the minutes so that we are aware that's going on, or rather than do any more recommendations? Councillor Pemberty?
Yes, what do you think? It's just when and how is the level of activity going to really start to reflect the level of ambition, I suppose, in the reading the affordable warmth strategy through to 2030, it feels like everything's just going to be, everything that we're currently doing is just going to carry on. They didn't see the kind of the growth to really match what actually needs to happen for those households. Or any innovation, any new partners, any new types of project. And I don't know if that's a factor, because obviously, yes, help write the strategy, which is fair enough. But what that recognition that something extra needs to happen to really to be delivering on what we all really want.
Do you really want to make another recommendation? That's what I'm asking, because I'm just trying to tease it out.
I think we'll have to think about something. Just another point on the Herefordshire affordable warmth strategy. This our work programme has been in place for some time. So I think probably for maybe a year we've known we were going to be looking at this topic. But unless I've missed it, I don't think this is the first I've heard about the Herefordshire affordable warmth strategy when it was an appendix to this paper. And I think the committee or members may have wanted to contribute or be able to comment on a draft version of that strategy at some point.
That's a good point. Yes. Right, I'd like to move on to skills now, please, because skills is such a huge area here. It goes back to what Councillor Thomas was talking about in terms of the availability of skilled tradesmen to actually do this work. Councillor Swingle, and I know Councillor Biggs can't be here today. He has a skills portfolio, and in the last administration, Councillor Challenge had a skills portfolio. But we've never had one person on the executive looking at skills right across the county. And it's not just about this area, though obviously this is one of the drivers in terms of the lack of skills on retrofitting. It's this ambition under growth to upskill our workforce. And yet we don't really have anyone focusing on a strategy on skills that we can then drive forward in order to try and achieve that. So one of my sort of ideas here is we need a skills champion on the executive. Somebody who's not just doing it as part of another portfolio, but is looking at it as a single topic right across the portfolios of a number of cabinet members like yourself with retrofitting. Councillor Biggs, of course, was in economic growth.
Yeah.
But there's other areas where it's very important in terms of just that focus on skills, and I really want to open that up for debate now. Councillor Thomas?
It isn't, you see, what you're talking about, retrofitting in building terms is dead simple. If it's internal, you have a carpenter who will stud the walls and insulate them. It's all, you don't need to upskill anybody, you just need to get more skilled people in there. And in my building career, 30 odd years, I trained 22 apprentices. I was a rarity. There were about 5 companies, and I wasn't a big company, about 5 companies in Herefordshire training apprentices. And the excuse was, and they were quite right, the college does not do the right sort of courses. It is, Herefordshire College, Technical College, was very poor in its level of training. We asked for this course, for plumbing courses, electrical courses. They all had, I had a boy on a plumbing course. He had to go to Worcester to be taught. And yet there are hundreds and hundreds of plumbers in Herefordshire. And we need as many plumbers as any other county. And so it isn't a case of upskilling or training. It's a, quite frankly, it's a dawdle in building terms to retrofit a house internally or externally. There aren't the skilled people there. There aren't enough of them. So what we've got to do is, rather than upskilling and spending money on that, we've got to think about getting more people in the industry. That's your only alternative. We've got to get more people in the industry to achieve the building targets set for us anyway. So that is where we need to concentrate, get the colleges moving, get them away from, some art classes or whatever classes which aren't actually really serving the purpose of and in making everything better for all of us. We need to get the training sorted out. This is where your problem is lying, not with upskilling, because it's a simple building technique to do either internally or external.
Well, I think it's both, Councillor Thomas. I'm looking at renewable sources of energy as well, heat pumps, other areas, and yes, I agree. We need more of the basic skills, but we also need different skills. I would suggest Councillor Swingle has as well in this area, and I really do feel that a focus on skills in this executive would be a worthwhile approach, because it is part of growth, it is part of your ambition. And I think that's something we need to look at. Councillor Proctor, but I don't disagree with you that we need to have all skilled trades.
This is just a small point, but as I have Hereford College of Art Higher Education campus in my ward, I want to make it clear that I think there is a real need for creative skills in our economy, alongside more practical skills.
Yes, yeah, I agree. So I will be proposing a recommendation for a skills champion. And I do hope that executive will look at that and consider it could be a support role, but I just feel that to have it as part of our portfolio is really not doing it justice. Councillor Highfield.
Just to add to your point on that, we noted in our early discussions a few days ago that this crosses so many different cabinet portfolios. We're talking about education, we're talking about training, the economy, planning. And so that's why somebody in the council who would be willing to speak up for the whole thing would be very valuable. Who it would be, with no idea, but it crosses portfolios. That's the point.
Yeah. We don't need to worry about that. It's our recommendation. It's for the executive.
Just sort it out. Just sort it out.
You mentioned skills earlier on. Do you want to come in at this point?
I've submitted a recommendation because I think it is important to look at the students that we have now and the courses that are on offer. It's also really important to look at all of our existing contractors. All the different kinds of people who might end up fitting internal wall insulation or maybe external wall insulation. But yeah, there's a lot of skills that need building up amongst all of our existing contractors too, I think. And I want to make sure that, things, for example, currently being delivered by HGN and MEA and Home Lacey, and that the whole industry feels that it's relevant to them. And, just your usual, someone who's already been plumbing or, doing building maintenance for the last 20, 30 years, make sure that they feel that it's not just some weird eco thing, and that they really feel it's relevant for them and it's marketed to them. That was the point of the recommendation I drafted.
I mean, I know we put all our eggs in one basket in terms of NMIT. We put a lot of effort into that in terms of developing it as a higher education model for the future. Is there any role for NMIT in all of this? And are we doing enough with NMIT to try and develop these range of courses that could develop these skills? I'm just opening up the debate. I mean, I don't know what the answer is.
I mentioned NMIT in my comment, purely because I think that NMIT could use the whole aspect of regeneration of insulation and all the rest of it as a specific learning topic for them to develop individuals coming forward.
Councillor Pemberley?
Well, just that I think NMIT have that absolutely at the heart of all their building courses is all about sustainability and environmental standards. So they would certainly be on board for any improvements, but I don't think that needs to be a suggestion to them. It is completely at the heart of all their courses, as I understand.
Yeah. But the point I'm trying to make here is whether we're doing enough to promote NMIT, to facilitate their ability to attract students, because that's back to Councillor Heathcote's point, that you can have the courses, but if you don't have the students attending them, then of course we're not succeeding. So I'm trying to open up a debate on how you actually use our sort of needs here to actually try and help NMIT to attract more students to do exactly the sort of courses we want them to do, to gain the skills we want to gain, and to stay in the county to apply them.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you say. That is in NMIT's heart. The important thing, I think, is that we get NMIT to engage with local companies as well to assist, and it's not within our gift potentially to do that, but if NMIT were to engage more with local providers and companies, they could then develop a way forward for, apart from teaching new individuals the skills required, but also would encourage local companies then to invest in NMIT and the skill providers, and also the ability then to conduct retrofits on properties potentially with new methods and systems of doing it, not just what we have currently, but to develop ourselves for the future.
Councillor Swinhouse, I want to come to you at this point, because you are part of the executive. Do you see anything from this discussion that you'd want us to recommend in order to help you in taking this forward then, Mike, or no? Are you happy that we're having the discussion, it'll be in the minutes, and that?
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. We can certainly raise it, ask the question, but they're sort of on their own journey and expanding at the rate at which they're expanding at the moment. It's relatively narrow. It's a small cohort. It's, they're not really set up right now to take on this kind of thing. But I also recognise, quite right, it's in their ethos. So it will be sort of somewhere in the journey that actually but they're not really mainly about the practical skills that are required. That's the difference. It's a slightly different thing. So an engineering degree versus knowing how to actually put up some subwalling, and that's so we've got a problem. We have a problem in the county, as you know, about young people who tend to then migrate out, go to university, and then come back, and it's retaining within county working age people who then have skills that can build houses, that can retrofit houses, do practical things. And our need, I think, somewhat runs ahead of the ability that we have to meet that need for having the right people in the county to do that work. I know, so we'll all have experiences ourselves of trying to get someone, trying to find a plumber or an electrician. It's quite a challenge. So I don't know. I mean, NMIT will have a role, but it's not a determining role within the ability to retrofit properties.
I'm going to bring in Councillor Proctor shortly, and then I want to go into the private rented sector, because that's something that's of keen interest to me. And I do think it does get neglected, and what we might not be able to do about that is quite important. But surely that's a role of the skills champion.
Yeah.
To go out there and to engage with the educational sector, and to see where the gaps are, and to see what's required. To engage with, as you said, Councillor Thomas, local businesses, local business
I think there'd be something to work around with, as Councillor Thomas is describing, the route of a young person going via an apprenticeship, learning practical skills, and then taking that onwards into their life. And we could see what we can do there. So think the idea of a skills champion or wherever that sits politically within the council to take the broadest possible approach, whether we're looking at, sixth formers, apprenticeships, multiple ways in which young people enter the workplace, or somebody might wanting to retrain.
Yeah.
Or adapt what they know.
Last 2 points, Councillor Proctor, then Councillor Peverty, and then we'll move on to the private renters sector.
I'll be brief because I think I'm mostly just going to be agreeing vociferously. I just, there's the whole housing sector is really where this skills issue sits. We need to build an awful lot of houses.
Yeah.
We don't have enough houses for people to live here. So working with registered providers, SME, it would be great to bring all that together, and retrofit would be part of that. And I guess the other thing is just to think a bit about this kind of emigration of younger people. And I think it would be terrible if we kind of decide you weren't allowed to leave the county if you want to become a plumber, but you can if you want to become a doctor. We need to enable young people to seek their careers where they want, but we also need to encourage people who want to be plumbers should choose Hereford as a place to come in and be plumbers.
Thank you. Councillor Peverty?
So just to also kind of endorse the way the conversation's going, but also to pick up on Councillor Heathfield's comment about, recognising what we have already and building on what we have. And I just think we should note that NMITE has partnered with 80 local industries, working with them to actually understand what industry needs and actually deliver that with their courses. So for us to just recognise how much of that work has been done already.
Thank you.
And just to add to that again, echoing what Rich said earlier, really around the Tech College and work they're doing, they're really good. These things are happening.
Yeah,
It's almost just shining a light on that and turning up the intensity, isn't it? Really?
absolutely. Yeah.
Sorry, I can't do
The
it.
private rented sector, which is quite a key one.
No,
Just to set the context, I have had even other councillors in Ross approach me about the state of the private rented sector. Deplorable housing conditions. Some people forget about heating, they don't even have proper windows. And we know all the cases that we've heard about in terms of the ill health that can cause through mould and damp and everything else. And I really don't want to get too much into this today because the bill is still going through Parliament. But I'm unsighted about how much the council is involved in trying to bring the private rented sector conditions of their housing stock up to standard. I mean, there is a part about making them more energy efficient and retrofitting, but even adequate heating, even adequate living conditions, which is what the private renters reform bill is talking about. And I'm very conscious that I haven't seen a great deal of debate about that within the council in my time in 6 years. We have talked about homeless, we've talked about housing generally, we haven't talked about this particular sector. And so I think this bill, when it is enacted, as it obviously will be an opportunity for the council to become more proactive in this area. I'm going to go on to the minimum energy efficiency standards as a separate issue. But one idea I've got, Councillor Swinghurst, that I have floated with members, is for the council, once this is enacted, to call a summit of interest groups that represent landlords and tenants to come together to see how they can take forward the actual initiatives that are within this particular act. And that's a recommendation I would like to put forward with the committee's agreement, because I do think it is an area that we tend to forget about, because we have plenty of contact with Connected, with Platform, with all the social housing contacts, we've got a Home Point, we've got everything else, but we don't tend to perhaps engage with landlords at a strategic level, but more at a casework level. So that is an area of very much of concern to me. The minimum efficiency ratings standards that the bill sets is E. It's only E. I'm really gobsmacked. I don't think I've got another
Most houses
word
come
for it. I don't know what we do about that. It just seems so lacking in ambition. Councillor Proctor, then Councillor Heathfield.
So for me, all of what you've just described is a symptom of us not having enough houses.
Yeah.
So if tenants had more choice,
Yeah.
then they would be able to choose not to live in poor quality accommodation.
Right.
I don't know whether this committee wants to make a recommendation that the executive redouble its efforts to supply more houses in the county, but that ultimately, that's everything else is just tinkering around the sides.
You're part of the committee today. You can put the draft recommendation up, Councillor Proctor, and the committee will then decide whether they accept it or not by voting on it. I'm more than happy for you to say that, because you are quite right. Without choice, these tenants have got nowhere else to live. But while they've got no choice, what are we doing about it? That's what I'm saying, to try and improve their living conditions, and that's a concern that I've got. Councillor Heathfield? Oh, Ben, do you want
I was
to
just
go
trying
first?
to find that example, and so with the new housing targets, obviously there's going to be a big change in well, going from 16,000 to almost doubling the housing delivery over the next how many years. So just understanding that again, Councillor Proctor, is it the case of going further than that, or a redouble effort to deliver that? Because I guess the council role there is within the strategic plan and looking at, I suppose there's looking at options in terms of some house delivery, but that's the private sector that's going to deliver the majority of that.
Well, there's that overall housing target.
Yeah.
There's also, we have a particular shortfall in certain types of tenure in certain locations. So some of that will be delivered through the planning system. Hopefully some of it will be delivered through a housing delivery vehicle the cabinet is setting up. Some of that can be delivered through just bringing the private sector together, or so that I think there's a range of interventions.
Yeah.
If we leave it to the market entirely, we will probably not get the balance of housing and locations and tenure that we actually need. That's
We don't leave it to the market entirely. I mean, through all of this stuff is already, we already do. So through planning with the and housing needs assessments, we have a sense of what we need and where we need it. Whether or not that's always sturdy enough against an appeal is, a question, I guess. But and as Councillor Proctor rightly says, the cabinet just made a decision to put some money to try to identify and fill some of the gaps in housing delivery. But it's also very correct that actually the status on the private rental housing is a symptom of an undersupply.
Yeah.
So in a sense, that does need to change. The supply needs to change. But then again, if you make it harder and harder and harder for landlords to let properties, that's going to have exactly the opposite effect.
Yeah.
But I'm not making those decisions.
It's become class war, hasn't it, against those?
Just before Councillor Heathfield comes in, there's a couple of comments I want to make. I mean, the summit, I would like part of the summit's remit, if you do agree that, is to look at this minimum energy efficiency rating of E and try and encourage a voluntary approach to going for better standards than that. And while we've got this 40% uplift in our housing target, it doesn't all have to be private housing. It doesn't all have to be 3, 4, 5 bedroom executive housing.
No, but
which is often
if
if we can try and shape that, I know it's a hell of a challenge, but if we can try and shape it, then we might be able to provide the sort of housing that Councillor Proctor is talking about, in terms of giving then those that can least afford 3, 4, 5 bedroom executive houses the chance to live in decent conditions.
Yeah, but where you're looking at housing and housing delivery, and if we look at the numbers that we have currently, the 27,260 plus probably a buffer, so it will be more than that. Then where are those houses going to go if you're going to build to scale with the different tenures and sizes and types in the affordable section? So as we know, if anyone's got a rural ward will know that when you get applications for 8 and 9, you never get any affordable, and they're always for sort of 3, 4, 5 bedroom properties, nearly always. So it will be building at scale within city, more density, higher density, smaller units, and that's where we'll start to see that mix, which we're woefully short of, and that could definitely be very, very helpful. But other things that have happened in the past have compressed the market, and I think that's difficult. Certainly changes to the tax regime that happened about, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. That had a massive impact. And a lot of people who were just, who had a property that were managing maybe for their pension, all exited the markets, and those were perfectly nice properties. But yeah.
All right, Councillor Heathfield?
Well, bringing it back to our current private landlords and the
Yes.
current private stock. I think the idea of the summit is really laudable, but at the moment, with it being an EPCE, I think all the landlords that are renting out something that's worse than that won't go to a summit, won't go to anything about anything. And so it's what to do about bringing it up to C, and I think potentially a recommendation about that we just need to write to and petition the minister every week until there is an announcement about when it will be brought up to C, and recognise, kind of planning for that it will be brought up to C at some point, and so then how will we respond, and what needs to be in place for all of those private landlords to be able to do that work in whatever the time frame is. I think that's an interesting part of potentially for the affordable warmth strategy, for all the strategies really, as to how that would be supported. And so is it worthwhile actually having a summit to work out whenever it is brought to see how would Herefordshire deliver?
Well, we can amend it, but I'm really keen that the tenants are involved as well, or at least they are interested. Organisations that represent them are involved, because it then becomes a one-sided dialogue between ourselves and landlords, and I think the tenants don't really have a voice often. That's what I find from my dealings, even in Ross, with some of the cases that are brought to my attention. And it's not, you're not just talking about poor conditions, you're talking about almost impossible conditions that people are living under.
I think Councillor Heathfield's point is that we will not be having a discussion with those bad landlords. We'll be having a discussion with the quite good landlords, probably.
We start somewhere though, because well, the recommendations there, we can amend it if you want.
No, but I mean, I'm just, I
Let's start
understand the
somewhere.
point there, yeah.
Councillor Thomas?
Well, the EPCE rating is a total waste of time and money. I have recently bought property, an old 1920s brick house, no insulation in it apart from in the loft, and I had it rated E. I'm trying to bring it up to at least a D, hopefully going to get it to a C. So that's a waste of time. Now, about where we can do something, because I don't know whether the act is still there, but the council were involved with bad landlords. Where there was a complaint, they went in and they went and they saw it. I know when I bought a house years ago to Brent, the council were involved then. Came along to look at it, it was okay. So we could, if there is still some way we can enforce standards, this is what we should be doing. It doesn't really cost a great deal for a visit from a officer to get that done. So we need to try to persuade the government not to go at least a D. The original proposal by the previous government was for a C. Every rented property must come under a C. Now it's dropped this, E. It's a waste of time. So you say, but you'll start somewhere, but that is not. There would be what, 1 or 2% of properties below an E, an F. I've only ever seen one.
We need to write to your local MP and get them to raise it in Parliament, or it's getting debated. Councillor Highfield.
Is there a role for enforcement in this objective?
Yeah, so I was going to say that this is one of those issues though that's not really, doesn't really sit with us. it sits kind of elsewhere in the council, so if you could reflect that in your recommendation, could we take it up with those other elements of council? And to see what are the scope of powers that we have and how much falls within our purview and how far are we pushing the boat out? Because I always think with the council, actually, we have only got so much resource to do the things that we have to do. We have to be very mindful of then putting resource into something that is not really our job. So, I want to know what are the limits of what sits within what we should be doing and what is without, and then we can decide whether or not to put the additional resources into something that we don't.
You've got planning in your portfolio, haven't you?
I have planning, but not housing.
So you've got building control?
Yeah, I have building control.
Is that not?
But it doesn't, but I don't,
That's
I
different.
don't,
It's
it
an
probably
enforcement.
sits with environmental health and.
It sits there. So are you willing to at least discuss that with the cabinet member? Yes.
Councillor Sue has the right there, and the standard that's enforceable is the minimum energy efficiency standards, which is that EPCE that you're referring to. So that's what the council can enforce too. And then, as you say, the separate action then is to write and lobby to get that to a higher standard. So, yeah.
Okay, councillor Pevity, then I'll bring the debate to a close and look for recommendations.
And I wonder, do you know whether we enforce that with our housing association partners like Platform and Stonewater? Do they have a minimum, do we request a minimum standard? Can we?
Yeah, we should, and I don't know if we enforce, because again, it's off to one side for me, it's not the new line.
Yeah.
But so I think that kind of, if the recommendation could reflect, could we as sustainability go and ask those questions of environmental health and housing, with the relationships with our registered providers and others, then that would give us a better picture of what's going on. Kind of one step removed, and that might be quite useful.
And I take
I don't know.
And I take the point about the summit, but I would still like to have some sort of way of bringing the tenant groups into this, because they've got no voice.
Have it as a recommendation, and then we can sort of
we can
go through it and see what.
We just have to see how many we've got.
Yeah.
Councillor Proctor, last word.
No, it's fine.
No, fine. No.
I was just going to point out that registered providers are bound by decent home standards, so that's. But basically, I strongly support going and talking to environmental health trading standards about their role.
Sensible. Yeah, thanks.
Well, Alfie, we're going to have a pause now till 11:45. If you want to pause the recording, thank you. And I kind of thank everybody for a very interesting debate. If those officers are only here for this item, want to leave now, they can do.
Transcribing the meeting once again.
Welcome back to the Environment Sustainability Scrutiny Committee, the 24th of March. The committee is now going to look at its recommendations following the debate on energy efficiency and retrofitting, and our scrutiny officer is going to read them for us.
Thank you, Chair. The recommendations, which I'm showing on the screen at the same time, are as follows for the benefit of those who might be watching the recording of this. They are as follows. The Herefordshire Council develops a coherent plan to deliver progress on energy efficiency and retrofitting across Herefordshire, including targets in line with their ambitions on net zero to include the co-benefits that flow from this, including public health, well-being and the cost of living. 2, appoints a skills champion on the cabinet to drive forward upskilling across key business sectors, including energy efficiency and retrofitting to support their growth ambitions for Herefordshire. 3, promotes publicly available specification 2038 PAS 2038 standards as a benchmark for property owners and landlords, as well as looking at its application on its own properties and associated sectors such as schools. 4, arranges a summit of interest groups of landlords and tenants to explore how to implement the Renters' Right Reform Bill when in force, with a focus on energy efficiency and retrofitting and a goal of improving living conditions for renters. 5, develops an able-to-pay market strategy which will identify the key barriers to able-to-pay investment, work with partners to overcome these barriers and use the evidence of the growing market to encourage supplier investment in the retrofit market. 6, investigates models of partnership with funders such There's a little gap there, which that's the moment, to offer private low interest finance to support the able to pay sector to retrofit within an able to pay strategy. 7, looks at ways to encourage small improvements and easy wins that would bring a disproportionate improvement to a property's energy efficiency. 8, ensures that council funding towards intervention on retrofit skills continues to be used for projects that are appropriate for and reaching all retrofit related companies in Herefordshire and focusing on existing people working in the industry as well as current students. 9, considers promoting a summary of all the sources of advice, help and finance more widely. 10, redoubles its efforts to substantially increase the supply of housing of different tenures across the county. And 11, analyses what it would take to bring all private rented accommodation, should I put there, up to the EPCC standard and identify what the council would do to help as soon as the EPCC announcement is made.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Just before I open up for possible debate amongst council members, any typos, I think we can agree that that can be corrected afterwards. That we're not going to get too fussy at the moment. Has anyone got any comments on any of the individual recommendations that are there? Councillor Highfield.
Yeah, the first one, we could go back to that. It sort of sounds like that we don't have a strategy, and I'm sure we do already. I wonder, I don't want to just say get rid of that, you know, to develop. That's not the one there, is it?
No, it's at the top.
At the top, can we get to the top one? First one again. Where are we? Yeah, I mean, develop a coherent plan. I thought we already had a coherent plan, don't we?
So we have done retrofit strategies. I've one, I'm not sure if it's still on the website, but I can share it if it isn't. So it was developed for us by WSP. So that's quite a big strategy. That was what informed our approach, if that makes sense. So whether or not it says to review it, if that's
well, I just to double check that it does include public health, well-being, and the cost of living as part of its strategy. Could it, because it to imply that you perhaps don't have one, maybe it needs a review rather than a review rather than.
Actually, no. If I can give you a counter argument there, the idea about recommendations is to act as a catalyst for the executive to come back and say what it may or may not have done. Now, I'm unsighted on this strategy. I've not seen it. As Councillor Peabody said, we're not aware that there is a warm house in a strategy, whatever it's called. So I'm quite happy for us to put the recommendation as it is, but let the executive and officers then come back and say exactly what is there, and then actually reassure the committee by showing us the strategy that is there, because we haven't seen it. Daniel.
Chair, might I suggest that you remove the word coherent?
Why is it?
As if they would produce anything that wasn't coherent.
Now you're asking.
Yeah, well done.
No, that was deliberate putting the word coherent there. It was, because this is such a fragmented area where there's all sorts of initiatives going on. I just wanted the word coherent to bring it all together.
But
I'm not fussed about it, Councillor Highfield. Take the word coherent out, but I'd like to leave it in and let's see what they've got to say, because the committee hasn't seen the plan.
I've already removed it, Chair.
Fine. Anything else on there? Ben? Yeah. Councillor Heathfield.
I mentioned about writing to the minister about the EPCC standard for private rented being brought in as soon as possible. But is that being not included because maybe
I think it just got.
It's going to do it anyway.
I think it just got lost in the. I think it was the bomb that you dropped.
Too many. Yeah.
You changing it then? Yes.
I know I can edit. Yeah, just bear with me. I'll just.
Thank you, Daniel.
Let Darren do this change and I'll bring in Councillor everybody.
Yeah,
and then I'll bring Ben in as well. Right.
So yeah, just a clarity on the third one, because it talks to PAS 2038 as benchmark for owners and landlords, but that's for commercial side rather than.
Yeah, it should be landlords, that's right.
It's just a point of clarity.
So,
The third one,
bear with me a moment.
You wanted it to be 2038, didn't you, Louis?
yes.
Well, so
But-
2038 is what covers everything.
Commercial buildings, yes.
Non-domestic.
2035 covers
35
domestic.
is domestic. So,
There was the conversation about whether or not we look beyond 2035 as domestic to open up opportunities to wider supply chain.
Yeah, that's right. We had to take landlords.
Yeah.
And then there was the conversation about conversely using past 2038 to drive that in terms of, so it was almost an opposite conversation, if that makes sense. It was, do we look wider than past 2035 domestic? And then it was, do we look at past 2038 for commercial?
And I think your answer was
20,
already that we go beyond that already with our own portfolio.
Look at the
Yes, in
20.
terms
So
of-
perhaps we're looking at outside of our own portfolio to encourage them to at least reach to 38. Is that what we were trying to say?
Well, we also briefly touched on how it can be a barrier to actually retrofitting.
We'll bring you in. An idea in that one is to quote both of them, quote both standards, 2035 and 2038. Then the recommendation would make sense.
So I was clarifying, I guess that was.
Oh yeah, I'll let Daniel finish what he's doing and we can amend that and then I'll bring in councillor Pepperty.
Working on the additional recommendation that you agreed from. And then so that's added. Bear with me, so you'll see that there. So I've added that to the end, right to the
Right, back to the third one.
One more, let's just let's just agree this one first.
Right.
Rights to the government and further petitions. Sorry. To demand that the. It's just a bit of work.
Is it the job of this committee to sort of write to government? I don't know. I thought we were.
We can ask the executive to do that.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
exactly,
yeah.
Is introduced for, is it for the private rented sector, Helen, or what?
yes, that's the specific.
For the private rented sector, fine.
Yeah.
Right, marvellous. So the
Back to number 3, please. And we want to quote both the 2035 and the 2038. Promote public available specifications,
okay.
2035 and 2038.
Is that wording what you wanted in there?
Well, I'm just concerned that I think it's a real barrier. It can be a real barrier. So I think the idea about private finance for the able to pay is about perhaps them having a choice not to have to achieve that standard, but hoping that they're going to achieve an improvement in their energy performance rating. So
why have the standard then?
no, it's not. So
You don't like the recommendation at all then?
I think it's good for when for the projects that are council funded. I completely get there has to be a really, really high standard to make sure. But I think in the private sector, then they should be able. In fact, they should be encouraged to make those choices themselves, especially if it is a barrier to them actually retrofitting.
Are you a conservative? That was wonderful.
Councillor Pepper, did you want to take it out then?
I want. I certainly think as a recommendation for council funded, government funded schemes, there should be a benchmark standard, which is the PAS standard. But I think if we investigate the able to pay strategy, there should be more flexibility in it.
So is the wording along the lines of
Absolutely right.
continuing to use PAS 2035 as the benchmark for council schemes, because that's what we're currently doing.
Yeah.
Right.
And that for, look to support homeowners with alternative standards where they're financing in a different mechanism. Is that essentially?
Yeah, that's great.
Right, Ben, do you want to draft that now, please?
What you said.
What you said, do you want to just type it out?
Just why I want to clarify. Because
Yeah, no,
otherwise-
absolutely. And thank you for putting it into good
Might
words.
help Daniel with tries.
Yeah, help me here, will
So the
you?
council continues to use PAS 2035 as the minimum benchmark for.
Bear with me a second. Sorry, my computer's now playing up.
Take 2030 out now.
So promotes the publicly available specification 2035, removing 2038.
Yes.
For council funded retrofit delivery, essentially. And
The council. Delivery.
and supports,
Yes.
or investigates alternative equivalent standards. For private schemes to consider.
Yeah.
As simple as that.
As
Yeah,
a
there's an
meeting
the rest out.
barriers.
Take the rest out. Thank you, Daniel. Well, at least the original recommendation got us debating it. That's the important thing.
I feel bad telling you the wording of your recommendation, but I was just.
No.
It's happy to guarantee a better answer.
I've taken recommendations, so let's do it before. We're quite open to wherever they come from.
I just wanted to make sure I did what you want.
Yeah, absolutely. That was really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Because you had absolutely no work to do, so if you give us a recommendation that creates a bit of work for you, that,
Yeah, thank
you know, keeps you occupied.
Is that everything from everyone now?
On the recommendation?
Yes.
No, I'm just, on page 2, the recommendation about just increasing housing. I'm not quite sure about that sitting as a recommendation from this committee on the debate that we've had, which was about retrofitting. I don't think that increased housing is a solution to raising standards in
Existing.
in the
Existing
rent.
housing,
Yeah.
Councillor Proctor?
We did have a conversation about this in the break, and I'm persuaded that, though you will probably find me recommending that we should increase the amount of housing in the county at all opportunities as a specific solution to the issue we were talking about, I'm happy for it to be removed rather than try and fight for it.
Okay. If that's it. That's very generous of you, Councillor Proctor.
There will be more scrutiny committees where I can make this recommendation.
Particularly where you are chair.
And not just for my benefit, but whatever the rest of the
So, do you
committee
know which
think
one
as
it is?
well.
You know, that is right. And there are forums to push more and more varied housing, yeah.
Let's go.
And one last point, just on a point of conciseness, I think on the second page, the first 2 or 3 recommendations all tie into that able to pay strategy that needs developing. So whether they need to be separate recommendations or whether it's part of a wider able to pay market strategy.
Can we leave, I mean, can we accept them in the structure they are
Yeah.
and leave Daniel to consider that? He might just then be able to combine them in terms of the format.
Doesn't work like that.
It doesn't work like
No,
that.
no, sorry, the recommendations you agree, the recommendations that I will take.
And they can answer and bring together the answers that cover all three
Yes.
They can,
things, yeah.
so.
Right.
Happy?
Happy to leave them as they are.
But the challenge is always worthwhile. Right, first, Councillor.
Sorry.
Because I need to go to waste.
I probably was a bit late with I wanted to add a very short one, and that is the council should reconsider the role of enforcement in achieving better housing standards.
I'm not sure we've had an opportunity to understand what enforcement. I haven't got a picture of what enforcement takes place through
Well,
environmental
exactly.
health and housing.
I'm saying they should reconsider it, and they've already agreed privately in the break that they will speak to trading standards to see what's being done in the enforcement sphere.
Councillor Proctor?
So that does feel like something where everybody around the table thinks it's a good idea, but I'm not sure it needs recommended, to sound like something that they're going to do.
Yeah, so we did say as part of the discussion, we will go and check with colleagues and.
You did say that, it'll be in the minutes,
We
councillor
yeah,
Highfield.
we will do
Yeah.
that.
Who does
I
We
guess
will do that.
if there's a recommendation on the outcome of that, then it's.
Well, then
Well,
could you
that's
say,
a
please
conversation,
let
isn't
the team will give us news about what's happening on the enforcement front, something like
We'll
that.
put that
Is
in
it
the
an
minutes.
information
Yeah.
thing?
Fine.
You're seeking information on
Yeah,
what else the council can do within its existing powers?
Okay, well, as long as we cover that in the minutes.
Yeah.
Cover that in the minutes, councillor Highfield,
yep, that's
and
fine,
then we can pick that up.
that's fine.
Right, 2 votes. One, are you happy to vote for all of these on block?
Yeah.
2, are you happy with the recommendations now as they are? We are allowed to abstain if you want. Thank you very much for that. It is now 12 o'clock. We're now going to move, are you happy with that, Daniel?
I am.
We're now going to move on to item 8, which is the review of the new waste contract, which has been operating for 6 months. I'm going to allow half an hour for this debate, and I'll tell you why. This committee has reviewed the waste collection services in the past, and it's also responded to the executive responses on those with further recommendations. So today, we are just going to be looking at the paper that the officers produced. Thank you very much for that. And it is about how the new waste contract is performing at this stage after 6 months. And if we can just focus on that as much as we can. I know there'll be temptations maybe to reopen some of the debates we've had in the past. And as chair, I will use my discretion as to whether I allow them or not. But to start the ball rolling, although I've got a couple of items I want to bring up with the officers, does any member want to lead in this debate for change rather than listening to me? Right, well, I'll start then. I must admit, it is disappointing that the recycling rate across the county is so stubbornly low. It's still at 40%. I know we are trying to push it up to, I think it was around 55. In fact, we've got ambitions that it will rise when we bring on stream the further recycling streams, garden and food. But it just seemed to me that there might be a lost opportunity to try and do more now through either publicity, education, awareness, even what we do at the household recycling centres. Any comment on that, Councillor Swimmer, has about what we can do in the meantime?
Well, it has been a cause of some frustration for me over a period of time, particularly. So recycling, I understand is actually it's a problem with the way that the funding isn't coming through, and we're waiting for changes to happen that haven't quite happened. So in a sense, we can see what's going to happen. It is coming down the line. But I'm always mindful, and you'll know this because we were on the
Yes, that's you.
the task and finish about this together. So it's always on my mind that the waste hierarchy doesn't start with recycling. And that it's upstreaming some of this stuff as well, where I'm really at. But it's a frustration that particularly we go to the household recycling sites, that we're not doing enough triaging of those streams to take perfectly good and reusable things out of the stream and place them where they might have a useful onward life. And that's what I'm just constantly going on about. I'm boring on broken record, but I know that there are issues with that over the contracts. So we have a contract to collect with a contract to dispose, and you can't just kind of change stuff midstream, which is slightly aggravating. But it's always on my mind that we could do better and should do better, because I absolutely believe that what we call waste is resource. It's the Earth's resources, but it's actually, useful stuff. And it really grinds my gears that it just ends up in a waste stream.
Yeah, because I was conscious of reading the paper. It was almost as if, and it's not meant to be a negative comment, that we were waiting for this new dawn when all these
Yeah.
additional recycling streams come
Yeah.
on board, and this will improve matters. And it just seems to me that that is almost creating a hiatus now where we might not be doing as much as we could in the meantime.
I mean, I think it's probably a balance of things around household compliance, because that's also really important that you get the messaging right and you get public acceptance. Otherwise, otherwise you lose ground. I think at the moment what we have is a system that's very pragmatic. It's kind of easy for everybody, but certain elements are not captured because they go into residual and to go to Hartlebury and make electricity, but they're therefore not identified as doing anything like being recycled. So that's, yeah, and also you have problems with the contamination of waste streams and things because it's being mixed, which is.
We need a circular economy strategy almost to set out
Circular economy strategy.
to set out exactly what we want to achieve in all these areas.
I think we can get there, and what's more, I think we can get there in the foreseeable future, but a lot of it is to do with the length of the terms of contracts and making changes within the terms of contracts.
Right, Ben, I'll bring you in before I bring in Councillor Proctor, then Councillor Thomas.
No, and I guess there's a lot, I suppose, a lot in that. So the first, we've got a strategy that's relatively recent, we're 2 or 3 years old now, and that sets out very ambitious targets, sets out and aligning to the government's circular economy strategy and the Environment Act. So it's got very, very ambitious targets in there. So it is very ambitious, and it is around that whole circular economy piece. And I suppose this new contract was a very significant step in that journey. And what it's done is it's laid a lot of foundations for those big changes to come, and they're not stagnating. There's a lot of work. You know, the Swan is paddling a lot underneath to get there. In that we are, planning to bring forward the food waste report and a garden waste report imminently, to be turning those on, subject to decisions in 12 months' time. And those alone will hugely change the recycling rate on the sort of recycling rate from 40 to 50. And those sort of things are happening. And this, the work that's been going on at the moment, as Councillor Swinger says, there's the collection contract and the disposal contract. So what we did after sort of setting out the strategy was we made a 5-year extension to the disposal strategy, which enabled us to make some good environmental improvements and take out some considerable savings as part of that contract, which runs until 2029. That's in partnership with Worcestershire, and we're now doing a lot of options work there in terms of beyond 2029, where do we want to be? And that's where we're going to have the really excitement there of looking at how do we better use the HRCs, how do we look a lot more at that waste streams there. We did take some opportunities when we did do that extension to be able to take out reusable items through our bulky waste collections and things, to be able to take it out of it altogether, because as soon as we collect something as waste, it's contractually bound to go to our provider, if that makes sense. That, we can have some change and variation within that, but we have a contract that everything we collect goes to that provider, and it is better, it's considerably better than it was, but with still some constraints. These are very long-term contracts. There's a previous 25-year PFI contracts. We're right at the end of that now, and we're really looking at, in 2029, what is the art of the possible? How do we really deliver that? So there's a lot of work going in there. As Councillor Swinger says, that's for me, some of the frustration is we have to wait a little time to get there, but we do have the opportunity to do that now, if that makes sense. And then on the collection side, this new contract was making sure that we had that service continuity in terms of, it was the end of the old contract. We've now got a very flexible contract, which again was a lot of recommendations from the previous task and finish groups, in terms of how do we get great value for our customers? How do we ensure good quality of services for our customers? And I think hopefully some of that comes through in the reports in terms of those service improvements, and having that flexibility to be able to drive that continual improvement and to turn on those big changes as soon as we can. So we're currently waiting to hear from government the confirmation of our annual grants for turning on food waste collections as domestic. So we've, as part of this, our contract, we've got an option that we can turn on, and we've also done the variations in the disposal ready to be able to turn that on. And what we're waiting for now is just to know how much money we're going to get to see if it's affordable, if that makes sense. We know how much it's going to cost because we've done all that work, and we've gone out and we've got really good, well, I believe really good prices on that. We just need to know how much money government are going to give us to deliver that. And then there'll be a report coming soon, and that will be a considerable change in the recycling rate and a big reduction of things coming out of the residual waste into the food waste. On the garden waste side as well, that's a service that we've developed as an option again as part of this contract. That we're working on behind the scenes, just finishing that business case in terms of updating costs. And that report will be coming imminently as well to turn that on as a chargeable garden waste service. Again, that will further increase recycling rates as well. So those are two of the really big ticket items that will drive that. And there's some ambition in there. There is also the option in the strategy to look at collection changes in the future as well, which was looking at 3 weekly. The government changed the steer, so we had to go back to single. Now there's a bit more flexibility. So there's been a lot of change in government strategy over the past 12 months. But the good thing is our contract here enables us to be able to deal with any of that, if that makes sense. We're also looking at a number of, I suppose it's in the report, and Nick's probably better to talk to it, but some of the other sorts of interim improvements we're going to put in there, sort of like small weave, electronic and battery, when we can look to introduce soft plastics and things as well, because we future-proofed the collection vehicles to be able to pick them up now. So we didn't sort of wait, okay, we'll do that in the future. We've just bought a new fleet. We've made sure they can do it now. So when we can make those arrangements on the disposal side, which we're close to doing, we can turn those on and then start to creep that in. Within the kind of wider work, we've done a lot of pilot schemes as well. So we did a big nappy scheme. We've set up, I think it's 5
Provided funding for,
5 reuse campaigns as well. Reuse
repair campaigns.
Yeah,
love them.
Yeah, and we are doing a lot. We did a behaviour change campaign, I can't remember now, but in terms of within 12 months, quite significant on trying to really promote that and all that work. And we're now going to be doing a lot more comms around these new services as they come in. That will be the kickstart of another round of big behaviour change and comms and engagement with residents. And so I suppose it's almost like you see nothing, then you see a big change just because of, I suppose, the significance of some of these pieces of work, if that makes sense. So they're very close on the horizon. And this contract now being 6 months in, it's a significantly different contract to what we had before. And there's been a tremendous amount of work that Nicola and her team have done in terms of ensuring that for members of the public, you don't see any change, because it's just a good service that's gone from an old contract that's collecting it to a new contract. And there's a lot of technical, a lot of back office improvements in there that the team have had to work very significantly to achieve. And it's good that people don't see that, if that makes sense, because that's what we need to deliver. And that's laying that foundation to be able to bring in all those other things as well. And at the same time, there's that options review we're looking at the future disposal in terms of exactly what Councillor has described. How do we get more waste out of the waste stream altogether, intercept it before it goes to HRCs by reuse facilities, and improving a lot more of that. And we'll have a lot more opportunity with that with sort of 2029. As well, I just wanted to kind of set that scene, if that makes sense, in terms of the strategy and the ambition there. There is a lot there. It's just phasing the introduction of that.
That's useful, Ben, when we're taking stock now. And I mean, the recommendation I was thinking about, we may have to amend slightly, because what I'm really saying, are we making best use of the flexibilities we have now in the new contract to actually push up? And it might not just be recycling. We could talk about push up the benefits of applying the circular economy, including recycling. So I may slightly change the recommendation itself, because we're taking stock, because that's what we're trying to do, and saying, here's a new contract, here's the benefits of it. For example, you've got these containers that you're hoping to attach to the wagons to pick up small electrical goods as well. Well,
yeah, we've literally this morning been writing all the copy text for the web page and the press releases and everything to go out for next week. So small electrical items like hair dryers, straighteners, remote controls, toasters, kettles, things that break or people swap on a regular basis. They can just leave out full collection on top of either bin. So we haven't restricted, it has to be with one or the other. Whenever they've got them, basically, or batteries. Everybody, as I expect, has got a pile of batteries sat at home somewhere. Think, oh yeah, take them to the supermarket, and you always forget to take them with you. So we are saying they need to go in a little bag, because obviously they need to be identified and just left on top of the bin. But again, those are the items there that
regularly would probably end up in the bin. They have a health and safety consequence if they end up in the bins. They are one of the biggest contributors to fires.
And you don't want them at Hartlebury either because they explode.
Some of the things there, no. So we're literally about to launch that next week.
Good.
As part of this new contract. So hopefully, people will get on board with that, and we'll collect a fair amount. The other things that are coming, there's a lot of preparation work that's going into these new services that are coming. Nationally, the recycling rate is falling across the country. We've held on to ours.
Good.
We've just about held on to ours. And if you were to take just the collection service from homes, actually our dry recycling rate for just those items, bearing in mind that we don't collect food waste separately and we don't collect garden waste for composting separately, we actually have quite a high recycling rate just based on that service that we have in place. Across the country, yes, people have got 50%, 60%. They've got food collections, they've got garden collections that get composted. We don't. And so for our recycling rate, for the services that we have in place now, they are quite good. And what we will see, as Ben has said, is as those publications start to go out with new services coming, it will rejuvenate people to use the existing services as well as the new services. So we know we've got 8% of our black bins is stuff that could go into our green recycling bins. Well, the information that goes out isn't just going to be about our food waste collection services. It's going to include information around the existing services as well. And it will rejuvenate that, and it will help to encourage people to take stuff out of that existing bin. The other thing that will happen with the food collection service is people will recognise, oh my goodness, how much am I throwing out? How much food waste am I throwing away? So what we'll see initially is a huge increase in what we collect on the food services, and then naturally that will actually fall. And it will fall because some people fall off the service, but it will also fall because people will recognise, goodness me, what am I doing throwing all this food waste away? And they will start to reduce the amount that they're actually throwing away because they make better use of it in the first place. So that's what these new services really will kick into the existing collection contract side of things. It will have a knock-on effect with lots of the other things.
Okay, I'm going to bring Councillor Proctor in, but I still think the challenge from this committee in that area would probably still be a good one. We're not saying that you're not doing well compared with others, but we're challenging you to do better, and we'll see what happens with that. I think that's quite a good challenge. Councillor Proctor, you've been very patient. Then Councillor Thomas, then Councillor Heathfield.
I have two questions, one of which follows on this, and the other is a very nerdy question. So if I park the very nerdy question, can I ask it?
Just have both.
Okay. So the question that follows on is, I'm just interested in the visibility that we have of the kind of the resources that don't come into our waste stream. So presumably we would. So if we massively reduce the waste arising and increase reuse and promote lots of use of charity shops, presumably we would see like the total waste arising would decrease. But do we have any other visibility of what's going on outside of our waste stream? And does it matter if we don't? Because is it ever going to be very significant? And then my very nerdy question, I'm sorry, is about the social value aspect of the contract. And I was very excited about that. And just obviously lots of councils have struggled to monitor the social value bits of contracts. So have we learned from other councils, and how are we going to monitor that bit? So that's.
Thank you.
I think in terms of, yes, if waste disappears, then absolutely we won't see it, and that will be reflected within our total waste arisings in our residual side of things, in the food collections as well. So yeah, we'll be able to monitor all of that. If it's not reaching us, no, it's unquantifiable. There are so many charity shops, there are so many organisations out there that do other things with that waste. We don't know about it. It goes to them automatically. So in terms of monitoring that effect, no, it would be nigh on impossible, I think, to be able to monitor that. Do our own services? Absolutely. So our household recycling centres where there is reuse and we've got some of the local organisations going in and they take those items. Our collection contractor now is also working with some of the same organisations that service the reuse at the HRCs and some new ones as well. So that if we're collecting items that have been identified as reusable as part of the furniture collection service, they can divert them off and they can take them, or some of the reuse organisations actually have just said they'll be happy to come and pick them up from the depot. So that element of reuse hopefully will start to increase as well as we move forward. It's been a bit weather dependent because of and that's difficult in terms of how do you protect some of those items to be able to continue to reuse them. So on that side of things, you know, we can look at and we can monitor how we're doing on those sides, no problem. But outside of what we collect, no, it would be very, very difficult to do.
So we do have an indicator that not just looks at what the recycling rate is, but what the amount of waste per household is as well. So we are measuring both. So as you say, you might see recycling. Yeah. So we're measuring that as a proxy, as a way of seeing that. So if you're not seeing the recycling rate going up, but you are seeing all the waste streams coming down, then that will give you that some part of that picture. If that makes sense.
It did occur to me, because we have a change in household composition, if we measure waste per household, you would expect it to go down because households are containing less people on average. So do we also do we see that, or are we able to control for that?
Just per household. The measure that we do is per household, not how many people are in that household. And that is the measure. It's on a per household basis, not a per capita basis, not a per person basis. We could do it per person as well.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose it's only interesting if other local authorities. I mean, I suppose
national indicators are per household. Yeah, mostly other local authorities do per household.
But yeah, it feels like. I mean, I would love to play with data all day, so maybe, I don't know how useful it is, but it feels like it would be an interesting bit of analysis just to compare over a protracted time period what the waste arising per household was and the waste arising per capita, and see if because I guess the assumption would be that they should basically match, and then that's fine. But if there is a disconnect, then that would gives us some interesting.
Although we had a little bit of, didn't the local electoral service recently show that we actually had a lot more people than we thought we did, because we were measuring per person. Didn't we have quite a big change in the last time we did the electoral roll?
I can't remember.
Yeah, I remember thinking, oh, that makes quite a big difference in terms of what we predicted as our population across the county. But yeah, it's something we could look at.
Okay.
So the second part.
Yeah, social value one.
Unfortunately, I'm going to take Councillor Thomas and Councillor Heathfield, and then
Can we get an answer to the social value quick? It's not just me.
social value.
Monitoring.
I thought you were happy with that. I thought you said it was already there.
So in terms of the question, then, was it around the monitoring?
Yeah. So that have we learned from other councils' experience of?
We spent quite a lot of time on this one, because I suppose when we set up the social value, we wanted to make sure it wasn't just a commitment and it had to be done. And so what we've put in there was we put in, I suppose, a series of abatements, haven't we, and reporting requirements. So every year we're getting reports back from the contractor in terms of this is what we've done, this is our efforts. So it's not just around the outcomes. We want to know what they're doing to achieve those outcomes, because sometimes they may just not be possible, and sometimes it gives us a good indication of their commitment and delivery as well. So what they can do through the contract is that they'll be doing that every year in terms of, and this is very robust in terms of essentially KPIs from the contract, where they would set us out to us, this is what we're doing. If they haven't hit it within a certain percentage, then we would have a rectification plan that says, okay, this is what we propose to do over the next period. Otherwise, the abatements start to hit and we get financial penalties into that. And then year on year, that what we can do is sit down and go, okay, well, if this one isn't working for whatever reason, we've monetized all of the social value and say, okay, well, you've committed to a value. And if that one's not working very well, but this one is working well, actually, we understand that, we can have a discussion about, do we make some slight changes to those commitments so that we're still getting that value to Herefordshire, if that makes sense? So it's quite innovative in the way it's been developed. It's probably the most mature we've ever done. I mean, it was a pilot of that social value through our major contracting. And so we spent a lot of time with it. So it is very well developed and very happy to talk you through it in more detail. But I'm assured that it's a really good mechanism for making sure it happens. And I know the team have been actively attended events in the shop, the town hall a couple of weeks ago. Ryan Curley, the support as well to make sure that, you know, we're delivering on that.
And are your colleagues who are other contracts coming down the pipeline coming in learning from your?
Yes, we've shared all of what we've done with the public realm contract procurement to make sure that, you know, this is a really good element of this, and to sort of say this is how we've done it, to feed that in, to make sure that, you know, this was the first one we did, so it was a bit more sort of evolving it as you go, but now we've got something that works, so it's applying that in the right way to future contracts.
I've got to say, it's well done, the team. They did an amazing job. The social value in this contract is really, really outstanding. And of course, we're taking that learning and sharing it with colleagues so that we see that in everything we do. So,
Councillor Proctor, do you want a recommendation along those lines?
I'm afraid not. It sounds great. I mean,
You're
I
happy with?
recommend that they carry on.
Are you happy with what's been said then? Okay, right, thank you. Councillor Thomas?
I think the waste collection side of it, what I can see as a customer, is going absolutely seamless.
Yes.
I was in Warwickshire yesterday, and they do have a much more progressive stance on their recycling places. For some time now, customers who have, as you say, but things that are recyclable, there's an area, they put them out, and other people pick them up and take them. And if you pick them up and take them, I think you've got to pay a small amount of money, which basically pays for, I suspect, somebody's wages to look after them. But it's been going for my sister-in-law, I think, 4 or 5 years now, and there's a huge amount of stuff recycled. And this is what we need to do, is get the recycling level up. So, you know, and the other thing on this one, my local recycling is Ross on Wye, and it never appears to be. There are more people going in because it's all computerized. You've now got to have an appointment and everything else. But I feel that probably, which came about in COVID, I feel probably that is holding recycling back now, because if you, for example, you're whatever, you decided to change your whatever you're doing that day. All right, we'll clear out that cupboard, or we'll clear out that whatever. You put it in, then you've got to go online, then you've got to find a slot to fit in, which may be a couple of days, maybe 2 or 3 days time. You've got it in the back of the car. Why can't you go straight to recycling? So I think maybe it works for your point of view, but what does it work for the client's point of view? I don't know. I'm asking. I'm not making a suggestion.
It's just there's a few things again in there in terms of the booking system. What it does is it improves the efficiency of running the site significantly. It's a better experience for residents to do, and it is really convenient to be able to book it. It is easy, and the usage data, as I understand, it's very rare that people can't slots, and there are availability is there. So I'm not hearing that message, and if they are, please let me know.
I have quite a lot of feedback, people that they prefer the slot because they are guaranteed, they know when they can go, they don't have to queue, they can get in. It's a little quieter maybe when they're in there, so actually taking the time to separate their items out rather than feeling, oh God, there's a queue, I need to get in, I need to get out, that's some of the feedback that we're getting. Don't get me wrong, there are some people who don't like the booking system, but we do get a lot of compliments with regards to it, and people liking that element of it.
And in addition, it does also
sort of putting stuff, the customer themselves putting stuff in, putting stuff one side. Is that something that you?
We have actual reuse containers. Yeah. So the one at Ross is if you go round and thing and then down again. It's on the front. And that's then helps to go to local charities. They take.
Okay,
from-
all right.
from there.
Yes,
So we could do more, but that's
Yeah,
the,
I just felt that probably could look a bit more in that direction. You want to get your recycling rates up, this is what it.
The other thing about the booking system, specifically in those areas like Ross and Ledbury on our county borders, is that it does keep people out who don't live in our county. So it makes that availability and the people who are paying for that service only accessible to them. We do get requests. There are some people across the border that come across, and one of the things prior to introducing some years ago was they did surveys at the sites, and there were numerous people coming over from cross border. And don't get me wrong, you probably get a little bit of that in other places, but I think those two sites in particular, and the one up at Kingston as well, there is the opportunity there. If there's not the booking system in place for our own residents to have a more restricted or busy experience because people are coming in from other places.
Okay. Final.
One last comment. It does also prevent illegal trade waste going into the site. So that means that, businesses that may have used it now have to make, the legal arrangements for that. And we haven't seen a respective increase in fly tipping at all. We have been monitoring that with the other team. So it's not that this has caused fly tipping. That's not the case. What it's meaning is that the waste is having to be dealt with legally without the council subsidising that.
Fly tipping is another issue, of course. Councillor Heathfield, the last word in this before we sum up.
It was really good to hear from you direct about how the food waste service is ready to turn on. Because reading the report, I was sort of concerned. It sort of sounded almost if you were waiting for legislation, but my understanding is, simpler recycling reform, it's Environment Act 2020. Every local authority has got to be doing it by 31st of March next year.
We're not waiting for legislation. We're waiting for central government to tell us how much they're going to pay for the revenue. So we've had the capital cost, we've had the transition cost funding, so the publicity, the money to do marketing and to actually introduce the service. What we haven't had yet, and what we understand isn't going to come until the next spending review, is what's the ongoing revenue cost going to be for that service. And of course, with pressures the way they are, we're hoping that we get that and we're able to take a decision in May that will be funded enough by central government that absolutely it's not going to be a concern to the council to move forwards. But there's an element of unknown there, I think, at the moment. Lots of local authorities are all in exactly the same position that we're in. People won't, they won't make the decisions. So there's a risk at the moment, and I have just there was a couple of questions that came through from constituents and went through Ellie Chowns with regards to the food collection services. And I'd said some months ago now we had concerns around not being given the amount of revenue funding. And they just came back again to say, have you had this yet? Are we at a position where it's getting too late? So I've literally just responded this morning to say, we're at a real risk now that the timescale to be able to procure the resources to be able to deliver this has been significantly squeezed. And because it's been significantly squeezed for lots of local authorities who are all in exactly the same position, the fight to get vehicles, there is only a limited number that come through, especially the smaller vehicles with smaller chassis. It's gonna be difficult, I think, across the country, for everybody to try to roll out by that date. We've got things within the contract in terms of procuring vehicles. We've got the pricing in there, but without the revenue funding, as a local authority, can we really decide actually we're absolutely going to move forward with this, or do we need to say we need to make sure that the funding's right? Otherwise, where do we get the money from to be able to fund something that central government is saying it has to be put in place?
So to be able to turn it on the 1st of April next year, when do you and the contractor need to know?
Yesterday.
Well, we're looking at a 10 months is what we can turn it on with. if it's any longer than that, we'll have to have conversations about what we can do, if that makes sense. So up to 10 months in advance, we've got confidence it can happen. We've had that assurance from the contractor. Government were meant to have told, numerous times we've been told it by the end of this financial year, we were prepared to be next week.
Yeah.
But obviously a couple of weeks ago, that was.
The transition announcement, yeah.
So if the outcome comes in May, as we're expecting, we've got time for 2 years. And as we've got everything ready to turn on. If that makes sense. It's then, so we're just, that decision's on the floor plan ready. So as soon as we get that confirmation, the report will come forward, if that makes sense. So we're as prepared as we can be. We just need to have that confirmation.
And just to check, factoring into that financial decision, is there potentially going to be fines from the 1st of April if you're not doing it to be factored in? Okay.
No. I think the general conversations have been that you may get a sternly worded letter from the Environment Agency, but I think so long as we've got things in train, that if the vehicles haven't quite arrived, they're on order. If there aren't enough people across there's only 1-2 companies across the country that do mass deliveries of containers. So if that's all planned in and in train, then that's as good as we can say to the government, look, this is the date actually that collections will physically start if we can't get everything in place ready for the 31st of March. But the intention from our point would be that, as Ben has said, we're preparing now, we know what we need to do. And we'll make every effort to get that in place, absolutely, by the date that we need to get that in place.
And just to summarise that, we are if we hear in May when we should hear May, we'll be ready and we can deliver it. If that makes sense. I don't want to sort of cast doubt that we can't do this, because on the timescales we've got at the moment, we can do this. If that makes sense. So we're just waiting for that confirmation. I just wanted to say that. Yeah.
Right. I'm going to let Councillor Proctor have the final say, and then we've got one recommendation, Daniel, or more.
We have so far.
Well, so far, and I'll bring this to a close because we've got another item we have to discuss. Councillor Proctor.
This is slightly wearing my SMB hat, because the council is looking at huge amounts of revenue uncertainty in the next financial year, and this is just part of it. But what sort of ballpark figures are we talking about? So what is the rough cost of the service, and which we are expecting the government might pay, or it might give us a share, or we don't know. Just
Yeah.
Circa 2 million mark. I've got exactly, because I'm just indicatively around there. We will see savings in disposal, because by taking food waste out of energy from waste, it's significantly cheaper. So we will see some of that. So as a unitary, it's good to have both aspects of that. Ballpark that figure, but we should get that figure from government. We just haven't had confirmation yet.
I wish I had your confidence.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to record for the minutes, Clerk, that the committee is impressed with the way this contract has been implemented, that the paper does show there has been vast improvements. So although we've had a debate on it, I don't want you to go away thinking that we are not actually pleased with the way that this has happened. I'll tell you why, because this is one of the areas where, as councillors, we will get complaints if the contract isn't performing up to standard, because it is one of the areas that all residents see in terms of the tax that they pay. So well done from that point of view. We've got one recommendation, which is the one I've already shared with members, which I've slightly changed. Can you put that on the screen, Daniel? And then if we can agree that, then we can move on to item 9. And officers, once that's agreed, the recommendation, if you want to leave, you can. And Councillor Swingerhurst as well, or you can listen to what I'm saying on the previous responses. So it's up to you. Yeah. Right, Dan, you can put this up.
So just one recommendation, that Herefordshire Council commission a piece of work exploring further options for improving current reuse and recycling rates across the county in advance of any expansion of the waste collection streams to food and garden.
Any comments on that, members? Are you happy with it? Can we vote then, please? All those in favour? Thank you very much, and thank you for the paper and for attending today. Right, we've
Thanks
got,
for the good work as well.
and good work as well. Item 9 is the update on responses we've had to 5 previous scrutinies.
I just wanted to say off the record for this, that Daniel, what I said at the last one, was a sort of general agreement writing about a standardised way to deal with recommendations and the timing of the responses and what we do if they're not back with us.
And that's in the constitution though.
Not really.
Is it not?
Not really.
No. Oh.
And Daniel suggested something which one was that? Was Connected Communities, wasn't it? And then, or Ed then suggested, then we talked about it again in Children's Services. So I wondered if Daniel, at some stage in this discussion, wants to run by you the same story to see if we can all agree a standardised approach to it in different scrutiny committees.
Well, we can do that outside. I think we're going to take up the rest of this time with what we're going to discuss. That's how I feel. We've only got 20 minutes.
Well, maybe Daniel could forward something to you outside the
Yeah,
meeting,
exactly.
and we can all say, do we agree with that or not?
If we can do it by email, yeah, that's fine, yes.
Yeah, if Daniel's happy with that.
We don't need to approve a scrutiny committee.
No, you don't have to.
Okay, right. We have received 5 responses dating back over 18 months of scrutinies that we have performed. 1 on river pollution, 1 on the Environment Act 2021, 1 on Nutrient Management Board, 1 on net zero, and 1 on active travel measures. Now I did a summary, Councillor Swiggless and Ben, that I don't think you've seen, for members, and I will go through it now. And what I'm going to ask members to do over the next 15 minutes is either add to this summary points that you want me to raise on our reaction to the responses, or agree what I've suggested in terms of responding to each. On the first one on river pollution, we only had 1 outstanding recommendation, Clark, wasn't that? And that was the one where we'd asked Simon Evans to give us a list of the 124 partners that were involved in the recovery of the river. We haven't yet received a response on that. All the rest looked okay, they've been agreed in part or in whole. So my only action on the river pollution one was to ask the clerk to gently remind.
So just if I might actually, just the way we organise our administration within scrutiny, it's actually the other scrutiny clerk that manages your recommendation.
Oh, it's you then, sorry, yeah.
No, it's another chap called Henry. So Henry manages all recommendations on behalf of scrutiny. I'll hold my hands up actually. The absence of recommendation number 1 is actually an administrative error, in that a copy and paste error, one might even say, when we sent all of these out. We never sent this one out. So I spoke with Henry last week, and we've agreed to action that one. So at the moment, that 28th of May 24 is incorrect. We have received no response, but we have put that out now to change.
It was our inaction.
Yeah, so it's our fault on that.
Okay, fine. So on river pollution, that's the one action I'm suggesting we should take. Members, are you happy with that being the only one on that one?
I'm just checking, is this the January 2024?
September 2023. 25th of September.
Right.
First recommendation in the appendix.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, so that's down to us rather than anything.
That's right.
Okay, fine. I'll take that one off, and that's in action now, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. We'll action.
Still action after. So that'll be in the minutes, Clark. Action. On the second one, on the Environment Act 2021, I think the responses we got were very good and very positive from the executive. And I think it was a credit to this committee to have had such an excellent response. It shows that our recommendations are hit to the mark. Did anyone have anything else I noticed people looking quizzically at their machines, but we did get these responses set out in the agenda, didn't we, Clark? So I was hoping you might have read them. Ben?
Was there another one in between? There was the one on the flood risk management.
And
There's another one in between. There's the flood risk management one as well. So just so you don't miss it.
Yeah, 2 recommendations are outstanding from the local flood risk management
Between the
strategy.
first one we talked about and the one you've just talked about, there's another recommendation in here on the list. You've skipped it.
which one?
Flood management, flood risk management.
Ah, but that hasn't got any responses
No,
yet.
well, but still we need
Oh,
to.
no, I'm only, sorry, I'll make myself clear. I'm only dealing with the ones who've got responses to. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
It was sent out in the email, but sorry, you haven't seen the email. The email set out that we've had responses to these 5. I'm only dealing with these 5. The ones we haven't had responses to, I'm waiting until we get responses, okay?
And that brings us back to the plan about
Apologies for that.
how we deal with no response.
This is what happens when you focus on what you think you've set out, and then other people haven't seen the email. Right, so I'm only dealing with the ones we've had responses on, those 5. The next one is the Nutrient Management Board, and since you are here, Councillor Swingrass, I will read it out. The responses are usefully detailed. We will have to take it at face value that the Recs 2 and 6 asking for measures and KPIs will be developed for the individual elements of the Nutrient Management Plan. Read the Welsh Water Asset Management Plan 8, recommendation 7. Would be grateful if Simon could find out if it's been shared and whether the committee members could see it. Finally, on last rec, again, if Simon can take an action to ensure that the diffuse water pollution plan is shared with us when available.
Right.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Swingrass? Is it?
Yeah.
I mean, we will share this email with you once we've done it. So that's the action for that. Any further points from members on that one? Sorry, Councillor Proctor. You went on the scrutiny committee, so it's rather cryptic, these. Right. So take that, but we will send out a response to Councillor Swingrass on these. Turning to net zero, they looked acceptable to me, and I was delighted that the Climate Nature Board has agreed to bring on board school academies, because I think it's very important when it comes to climate change that we do have the young people involved, particularly those at the secondary level in education, because they're the ones that are most aware of what the future holds for them and can actually have their voice heard in terms of what's saying.
And just to say, following that, we did also do the schools climate conference here in this building later on in that year as well. So we had,
Excellent.
that was covered by
We did a
BBC.
COP.
Yeah, that was really good.
COP.
Really, really good.
Did we get any sort of communications on that as members?
I would have thought so, but I'm sure I can send something again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was covered.
She's asking about.
May do it again. It was very obviously the schools really enjoyed it. The teachers said that the kids got a lot out of it. So it was, yeah, it's a good thing.
Because the young voices are important. There's no point me at my age going on about it because if it's going to turn out as bad as it is, then it's going to affect those that are much younger than me.
Ben and I were talking about this earlier, and we talk about the voice of the child in respect to children that are under our care in some way or another, but we don't do enough to get the voice of young people generally. The Ledbury presentation we went to, didn't we, which was spectacularly good. That gives a view of young people on what's going on in their area. But this is particularly important, that they understand and contribute to what's going on.
And hence the recommendation that we made, Councillor Highfield. I'm delighted that our partner has taken on board our recommendation that we made. Bonus and bonuses all round. Net zero responses. I've already dealt with that, it's fine. The active travel measures has inspired me to come up with another topic for the work programme, although I accept what you said, Scrutiny Officer, that we need to look at your review before we decide the work programme. The responses to our key first 4 recommendations was all around, let's wait for the LC whip to come out. Well, we haven't seen the LC whip, so it's hardly surprising we're making recommendations that are pertinent to what might be in the LC whip. I was slightly peeved when they said this duplicates what's in the LC whip, Well, I was actually going to say, well, doesn't that mean a tick for us? Because actually we're ahead of the game by actually telling you what should be the LC whip. So Councillor Swinger has,
It's not my portfolio.
although they've come back and say, yes, it's all going to be an LC whip, that doesn't provide reassurance to us until we actually see the LC whip. So what I've decided to do is to have the LC whip when it comes out as a topic for our future work programme. And the objective for that topic will be our 4 recommendations from active travel measures. So it then recycles what we asked for back into, well, let's look at the plan now and see whether our recommendations were actually on to fruit.
Yes.
So that's what we're going to do. We're not letting you off the hook.
It says spring 2025 for that. Is there any knowledge on?
On when it's going to be produced, yeah.
I think there's been a few personnel changes, comings and goings within the transport team. I think we have just recruited well, I know for a fact we've just recruited a new transport planning manager from Shropshire Council, Fiona Horton, who is joining us. So I think she is going to be instrumental in the developing the infrastructure plan.
Okay, any further points to add to what I've just said? Yes, Councillor Highfield.
Can I talk about one of the areas that we haven't had any answers? Just
Yes, if you wish. Yes, no.
right. The last one is about public rights of way.
Yes.
There are basically no responses there, and I know from what I know is going on, there could have been some answers by now. I know some of these things have been answered; they've been talked about. So I think they could have answered us. Maybe not all of it, but some bits of it. Reporting defects and that area of it. I know there's been actually some good work done. They could have said, well, we've done this, we've done that, and that would have been nice to hear. So I don't see why that's not come back to us.
Well, can we feed that back to Henry?
You will do.
Yeah. Now,
Just on a note on
Yes.
process there, because I think you'd normally get the executive response as one. So I suppose you'd probably get informal updates, but in terms of a response, that would come as a single
Correct.
report, wouldn't it? Just in terms of process, so.
But they
That
have
might-
to answer
that might-
everything in order to answer. That doesn't make sense.
My understanding as an officer, I'm just, I suppose, noting that because.
Well, there were 7 recommendations there. We've got to wait until they got an answer to all of them before we hear the answer. That doesn't make sense.
I don't know, that's put on front.
Well, Daniel, I'd take your advice on that.
Well, they could, we submit the recommendations in block. Normally we receive the responses in a block. That's not policy, so they could respond to them in part, or they could respond to say that we'll provide a fuller response in due course in the gaps where they are. So
It seems to me in some fields, some questions might be quite difficult to respond to quickly, whereas others will be easy. And it just seems a bit counterproductive to wait until they've got all the answers before we hear the rest of it, in case there's any follow-up or something, But I take advice on that, the system, how the system works.
okay.
so fine, there's 3 actions there, Clark. One is to write to Simon Evans, and obviously how we phrase that is we have to be very careful. Just say sorry, but perhaps apologise and say we never chased this up.
I think that's already happened, Chair, but I'll chase
It has, and there's 2 other actions on sharing AMP8 from Welsh Water and sharing the DWPP. If somebody could take actions to do that, and that really covers all the responses that we've come up with. Apart from, we've already changed the work programme to include LC WIP for September
Correct.
meeting. That's right, which pushes back land use and management and home energy funding to November. Because I just feel that if that is the answer to a whole set of active travel measure recommendations, then it's quite key that we actually then see that that actually does cover what we want. Thank you very much, and that just leaves the last. Oh, Ben.
I was say, it might be worth, you've probably done this already, but it might just be worth checking with Dr. Dave Land around the timing of the LC whip, just to make sure it's ready for the committee, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but as Councillor Heaple said, we were expecting it in spring, so that's why I said September.
Yeah.
If it's not ready by September,
Yes, it's not my service, so I don't.
I know, I just wonder, because it's been trumpeted at a few meetings that we've had round this table as a committee.
The Kent Communities Committee looked at it.
As well, yeah, so let's see it. Right, item 10, the work programme. We're not going to have a discussion of that today because I feel that, we've got to look at your scrutiny review report, Daniel, and then we need to take stock on that. And B, I really do need to have a session with Daniel first to look at the gaps that we have later in the year, to see what topics we should be thinking about including there. Again, I give you the invitation, members, if you've got any topics you want to raise for our work programme for the rest of 25-26, for those slots that still remain, and then by all means email Daniel and let us know. But
Maybe if there's anything councillor Swinglehurst wants us to look at.
As well, yeah.
Particular, yeah.
Okay, let me cogitate on that.
Okay, fine, thanks. But as I say, we need to look at this review first, just so that we know exactly what we are going to be tasked with it going forward. Date of next meeting is Monday the 12th, and the time is, I will get it for you, Clark.
10 PM, I hope.
I but it's just fair, Councillor Highfield, since you always monitor whether we actually get to 1 o'clock or not. So at 12:55, I announce this meeting closed, and Alfie, can we have the recording switched off? Thank
Yes,
you.
I can